Hello. Good morning, everybody. I think it's 10 o'clock and we might make a start. And I'm going to start by welcoming those members of the press and public who have joined us today at our first meeting of the Strategy and Resources Committee in the new Shire Hall at Alconbury. I'm also going to welcome all of the members here today. It is actually very nice and exciting to be chairing the first meeting in our new building at Alconbury and in this room. So it's very good to see you all. And welcome to Alconbury. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place? Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There are no fire alarm tests scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble in the car park. And that's the door over there, and also two at the end. So, first of all, apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Would the Democratic Services Manager report any apologies for absence?
Chair, I have two apologies from Councillor Goldsack, and Councillor Costello is substituting, and Councillor King and Councillor Beckett is substituting.
Lovely, thank you. Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? No. Wonderful. We will move on to item 2, which is the minutes. We are asked to approve the minutes of the Strategy and Resources Committee meeting on the 6th of July as an accurate record. If any member does not agree, could they raise their hand now? Fantastic. I will sign the minutes as an accurate record and we will take that as carried unanimously. The updated action log has also been included in the published papers for this meeting. Most of the actions are complete, so Tom, could I ask you to pick up the outstanding actions?
Thank you, Chair. So the action under item 7, I think hopefully that now complete as well by providing that information in the IFMR. And then the action under 6B, there is a monthly process which will continue for reviewing combined authority funding, which is signed off by finance and submitted by budget managers each month.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Tom on those items? No? Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tom. Item 3 is petitions and public questions, and we have received no petitions or public questions for this meeting. Item 4 is the peer challenge report and the action plan. So if I could ask Gillian, the Chief Executive, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to give a short summary of, if you like, the corporate peer challenge process before then inviting each of the officers here responsible for the actions just to update where we are on each of those actions. So the corporate peer challenge process is an improvement approach for local government. And the process, as is often stated, is not an inspection, but it actually brings together an experienced team of members and officers from local government to consider evidence presented to them through interviews, extensive interviews in this case, and they do that through the lens of 5 themes which are regarded as critical to Council's performance and improvement. And just to remind members of those themes, so the first one is local priorities and outcomes. The second one is organisational and place leadership. The third is governance and culture. The fourth is financial planning and management. And the fifth is capacity for improvement. Some of us here, I don't know how many of you will remember, if you like, the old way in which Council's performance and improvement were judged, and that was through what was introduced in 2002, which is a comprehensive performance assessment. That was followed by the comprehensive area assessment in 2009, but that was all abolished in 2010. And at that stage, the Local Government Association worked to create a framework which was initially called a corporate peer review and is now called a corporate peer challenge. And that was designed to create a sector-led approach to improvement, and I described that earlier. The important thing to note is the government does support this approach from the Local Government Association. It's meant to be supportive, but it also has a high degree of challenge, and as a result it has credibility with government as an effective tool to drive improvement in councils. During our set-up meetings with the LGA team, they made it very clear that they would subject us to a high level of challenge, and they also made us commit, which was quite right, to publish the report and also the action plan which you have before you today. One of the other aspects of local government peer challenges, it also allows us to add additional areas that we want to focus on, and we took the opportunity to do that. So we added areas concerning our current financial position and sustainability, understanding key risks and how they are managed, and we also added a review of the committee system and looking particularly at the alteration of the frequency of committee meetings. In line with our commitment, we did publish the report and the action plan on the 6th of September, and as I say, that's what we're now considering today. Before we get into the detail of this, there's one further comment I want to make by way of introduction. The action plan that you have before you deals with the main recommendations in the Corporate Peer Challenge report, but there are other recommendations, comments in the main body of the report. I just want to say these have not been forgotten. Rather, they are picked up in the Joint Agreement Action Plan, which is the next item on the agenda, because they'd been previously identified by the Joint Administration as needing action. Chair, as I said, we're going to take each of the sections in the action plan in turn, and the first person in turn is Tom Kelly, our CFO. So I'll turn to Tom. Thank you.
Thank you. So for action 1.1, the process for this year's business planning is now well underway, mobilising the officer governance, which you can see detailed in the report, and important meetings this week of both the Rapid Implementation Team and the Capital Programme Board, bringing forward proposals which will then reach the member governance, which is also detailed in the report, with monthly meetings of chairs and vice chairs, and coming forward then to later meetings of this committee later in the autumn. There are specific actions in the peer challenge which are also being addressed. For instance, there's additional capacity around the high needs block deficit that's been deployed, and we're having a close look in the Capital Programme Board at capital prioritisation and capital slippage, which is a particular challenge last year. That will be brought forward, and we'll see that the committee has got further details about the initial results from work already on the business plan under item 9 later in this meeting.
Chair, shall I just continue
Yep,
to go through?
absolutely.
Is that okay? So the next item is the strategic member officers strategic forum. There's not a lot to add to the actual actions there. Suffice to say that strategic forum was set up very early in the new joint administration's work, and how we've described how it relates to the senior management team, and also to committees and to workshops, and also through to the joint administration action plan tracker. So I think that speaks for itself. Moving on to 1.3, there is an update to that. We are in touch with the LGA. They are providing a trainer for us free of cost. And also the 4 peers who supported the peer challenge have indicated their support to us to put on this training, and some of the peers are hopefully going to be able to attend that training because they're committed to helping us on that item. In relation to 1.4, I think that speaks for itself. The recruitment process has started, and that process and the dates are set out there, and I think that will end up in an appointment in November this year, hopefully subject to the candidates. 1.5, there is, I think, an important update here. So this is an important, I think, set of recommendations, at the moment, we have completed what we call the COVID-19 review of emerging evidence of needs and impacts of COVID. It's been completed for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough alongside some work that the Combined Authority have done around economic impacts of the pandemic. So the outcome of this work is being drawn together and presented to a summit of public service leaders, and that's going to take place on the 14th of October. And also it will be presented to a member workshop here for Cambridgeshire County Council, yet to be organised. So it will go to a leader summit, but also it's important that we as a council have a look at this COVID assessment and look at that through the lens of the recommendations that the Corporate Peer Challenge have made. So hopefully through the work that we've commissioned through that summit and through the work we're going to do internally, we'll be able to identify what public sector organisations could do together to deal with the needs and impacts of the pandemic and the wider issues that we see emerging. What organisations need to do on their own, that's important. But also, I think one of the key issues is doing if you like, a review and a reset and a rationalisation of the numerous partnership structures that have kind of grown up over the years, but also actually during the pandemic, and endeavour to reset and rationalise those, because they are rather complex. And we are questioning, do they aid the delivery of the outcomes that we need to do as a result of the COVID work? So I have to say the workshops will only start the conversation. I would imagine that conversation and that work will go on for some time. And I would imagine that your new Chief Executive will want to work with you all during the course of the next year, during the last part of this year, next year, to actually land the recommendations that are set out in 1.5. So it's a start, but as I say, it's not the finish. I hand to Tom now for this land.
Chair, so under 1.6, following a procurement process, the property consultants Avison Young have been appointed as the reviewer, and the committee will see in the report the 5 questions that have been set for Avison Young as part of that process. It's scheduled to take 8 weeks and is just getting underway, and additionally there's some further information about this land in item 7 at this meeting.
Chair, 1.7, that's reviewing the effectiveness of the committee arrangements. That review is in 6 months' time, and the LGA have committed as their 6 months review will take place to help us with the review of those committee arrangements. So they will build into their 6-month review this particular issue to assist us. Amanda.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. As you've already heard from Gillian, both the council and system priorities are being reviewed and reset. And there are several inputs to the priority setting process: the administration's joint agreement, work in individual committees and through the chairs and vice chairs group, the COVID impact assessment work, and the system-wide leaders workshop, which Gillian's just mentioned. The output from these discussions will be the council's new corporate strategy and corresponding action plans, which will be brought through this committee in draft before going to full council in February as part of the business planning process. As we develop these action plans, we'll be identifying the skills and capacity that we need across the organisation, and we'll be looking outwards for examples of good practice and innovation from other councils and indeed from public, private and voluntary sector organisations. So the transformation resource across the organisation will be pointed at the new priorities in the corporate strategy.
Chair, in relation to 1.9, the media protocol, as you can see, is going to constitution and ethics, and that's only a further update on that, and that will be obviously debated and approved at that point. And in relation to 1.11, that work, as you can see, is in progress, led by Sue Grace, who's here today, and we have built the objective into that corporate objective into everyone's objectives, and so that means that we mainstream it across all of our staff, and as I say, that leadership is taken up at the highest level. Moving on now to the corporate peer challenge shared services. I think, Amanda, you're going to take us through those.
Yeah, thank you. So you'll see here a series of recommendations on shared services, the first of which is to have a workshop between the two councils. And we've been working with the LGA to design that workshop, which will be for the leader, deputy leader of both councils, as well as senior officers. We hope that's going to take place towards the end of October. We've been offered support for that workshop through the LGA's local partnerships team, and we've also had input from both peer challenge teams, including the political peers who helped us with the shared services day. In preparation for the workshop, chairs and vice chairs are already working with directors to review original business cases for shared services in their areas, as well as the current context to see what has changed. The output of that work, as well as the output of the workshop, will be shared through this committee and service committees as soon as possible after the workshop. Actions in section 2.2 to 2.5 will follow on from the workshop and be carefully planned. And I'll hand back to Gillian to discuss recommendation 2.6.
Thank you, Amanda. 2.6, there's nothing really to add. It just sets out the political engagement that is currently in place. Clearly, we have the emerging ICS and ICPs. At the moment, the chairman of the ICS is in recruitment, and there will be recruitment to senior posts within the ICS. And obviously, we'll have to review that provision or those actions once we know those new individuals. So, but at the moment, that represents the current position, Chair, and that's the end of our updates. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for a very thorough analysis of the response to the peer review. I think I certainly felt it was a very useful process and very well done by the peer team, very thoroughly investigated. Are there any questions from members on that report? Steve. Steve, I don't think your microphone's switched on.
Touch. All right, thank you, Chair. Just want to check on 1.1 with Tom. This was about the strategic planning for finance, and it says the strategic approach to medium-term financial planning and performance is now managed through a series of officer and member forums established since the new administration took over leadership of the council. I can't recall attending any forums. So what forums are those, or is that for the administration only?
So I think it's fair to say we review how business planning works every year. So it's been an iterative process. The rapid implementation team, which is mentioned in the report, is a new officer group, and so bringing together key officers from all of the departments across the council to kind of focus the revenue process, particularly conscious of the large budget gap we've got this year. So obviously we've got the public report you can see bringing substantial update to this committee today. But the other group that's mentioned is chairs and vice chairs, which of course the Councillor Camp will recognise, and that has been considering on behalf of the administration the early stages of further information to come through. So I think it's probably a similar role for chairs and vice chairs to previous years, but kind of stepping up the regularity and the rhythm of information that group is receiving from the rapid implementation team.
Okay, thank you. In which case, I don't think it's really appropriate that it's described as member forums, because that includes a level of scrutiny, whereas it's actually forums for the administration only, the chairs and vice chairs. So I'd just like that comment to be noted, please. Whether you change the wording, that's up to you. The other one is a question for Councillor Netzing as leader. Further down, it says SMT is the officer decision-making forum for strategic financial decisions. Now, according to my memory, it's always been the realm of members to make strategic financial decisions and officers to make operational ones. Have you delegated that, or is that a case of clash of words and you'll be putting that right? Thank you.
I don't think that we've either delegated it or that there's a clash of words. I think that the wording makes it clear that that's the officer forum for the management of that strategic work. But the overall responsibility remains with members, as it always must and should.
So we have your assurance that strategic financial decisions, as mentioned, remains in the realm of members?
Of course.
Thank you. No further questions.
Lovely, thank you. Any other questions on this item? Peter? No, sorry, Richard.
There's a joke there about you calling me Peter, but it doesn't spring to mind, but I forgive you, leader, chair, whatever we're supposed to call you. Yeah, no, I think it's strange if we don't have some deliberation on this. I'm sure you'll want to make some concluding remarks as well at the end of the debate, because there's been such a big initiative on behalf of the authority. I think we should thank Gillian for her presentation this morning and that of all the other officers. We should be thanking all of the members, cross-party officers and our partners who took part in this. Is a major exercise. It was a very timely one from the point of view of the authority. I think we should be very grateful for the LGA. Look forward to the continuing part of this. So I think there's been a lot in this that we shouldn't just nod through and have a few questions and actually say this has been a remarkable, interesting, constructive and learning exercise. Doesn't mean we all agree with everything to the last dot and comma, but definitely it's assisted us. There are a couple of areas where I'll make more detailed comment. One is I'm very pleased to see 1.5. One or two members will know that I've been asking whether the authority can just reflect on what it's doing in terms of its economic development function or lack of in the past. No one wants to duplicate what's happening at the combined authority. So anything we do should be complementary to that. But a lot of county councils have LAPs, but also have their own distinct economic development strategy. And you look to places like Derbyshire, who are involved in setting up social enterprises. Suffolk have their own growth strategy. Norfolk runs projects helping small businesses to access finance. Lancashire has its own technology transfer initiative. Nottinghamshire has specific support to specific industrial sectors that are important to their economy. So a number of county councils are very active in this area. And I hope that when we go to the meeting on the 14th of October, Gillian, that we will have some reflection in advance of that about how we can ourselves develop an economic development approach which is supportive and complementary to what's happening in the combined authority, which is relevant to our services and the input that we can give, but which is also, and which of course is relevant to the Cambridgeshire economy and the needs that we have within our own county. And I'm quite excited by that. I was pleased to see that in the LGA peer review, and I'm very pleased to see it in the action tracker. And I think there's a lot of exciting ideas around local government about economic development at the moment. For example, community wealth building, the whole issue of just transition. So we've got great policies on the environment as a council, but what are the social consequences of that? You know, so I really think that the joint administration can take a fresh look at some of these ideas. And the second point I want to comment on is in relation to the shared services. It's sensitive, I know, and I'm very pleased by the proposal for the workshop, although we will need time as Cambridgeshire members and officers to talk to each other on this within the structure and to reflect even potentially in advance, not just in a single big bang day. I was very pleased by your statement, Chair, in the press release that came out on, I think, on the 6th of September, which I think gave some useful clarity on that. But I think it's useful also for us to say things today about it, because certainly feedback I've had within the adults and health field is that there is some uncertainty around both amongst some of our officers, but also amongst some of our partners about what our intentions are. And I think we as an authority need to be as clear as we possibly can be at this stage about our intentions, because there's a danger that people overinterpret what we have. So I'd want to underline what I think you said, that we do want to delineate the services more than in the past between Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. That is our intention. But it's not about tearing up the arrangements that we have. We're going to have a very deliberative process. It's going to be one which is joint member officer. It's not just going to be imposed from a political level. And it will be a rolling programme. There's not going to be a sudden big bang announcement, and people shouldn't anticipate that. And I really like the element of the LGA peer review, which says that in the past it's been opportunistic and we need to make it more strategic. That's not necessarily a criticism of the past, actually. Taking opportunities where they arise isn't a bad thing, but the idea that now it's reached a point where we should be more strategic about that, I think that's a useful useful recommendation for us to have. And there will be areas where we choose, and we've done it with the new chief executive, and I think that sends a signal, and I think it will create a sort of space, energy, time, capacity and a dynamic arising from that is going to then affect the rest of the organisation. But where it's sensible, and in the adults and health field, which will be subject to this, it won't be immune from it, but we obviously have joint arrangements that are particularly with health partners that cross the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. You're nodding, we've discussed this, but this is for the wider audience, of course. And we're not going to disentangle or unravel those. In fact, we want to make them even more successful in the future. So I hope, again, you'll say some more in the summing up, Chair, but I think it's very, very important at this first public airing of the peer review, since it was published, that we do say some words, because I know people are interested out there, and I hope those words continue to sort of rumble around and get heard and seen, because this is something that's very positive for Cambridgeshire. It will have a new and different and more respectful relationship with Peterborough. It doesn't end the relationship with them, but we believe that the new administration can deliver better outcomes by taking this more delineated approach.
Thank you, Richard. There's a huge amount in there, and I will pick some of it up afterwards. Is there anybody else who wants to comment on this? Okay, I'll pick it up now in that case. So yes, there's a lot to say and a lot in this report, and I agree with all of the things that you've said about how valuable it's been. I think it's really important to make it clear that this peer challenge is a process that actually we've had a really good solid chunk of work that was done in the summer with the peer review team, and they were an impressive team, and we were very lucky to get them at the short notice that we did, and they've produced us a fantastic report. This is the action plan to that report, and we will continue working with them on elements of this report over the coming months. So this is the next step on what will be a process around this review report, and I'm really pleased that there's been so much positivity about it at this meeting. That's really helpful. I think there are lots of things that Richard said about the shared services in particular, which I think have the work that's come out of the peer review report has really clarified some of the questions about where we are on those shared services, about where the councils are now and what the direction we might be heading in is. I think it's become very clear that there isn't going to be a single answer across the whole council on the future of those shared services, that it was absolutely time to review them, and that there will be different responses for different parts of the council, that in some areas of the council's work, moving the connections back down so that they're more closely related to local communities, where there's a really good, strong connection with the local community and the local place that is served, is perhaps the direction of travel. And in other cases, as Richard's referred to, we need to look at perhaps deepening and broadening the relationships that we have across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and the work on the integrated health system is a really clear example of that. So there will be significant ongoing work in that area. Obviously, the new chief executives of both councils will need to be involved in that work, and it would be premature, I think, to make too many very quick decisions before those people are in post, because with those two new chief executives, the working relationship between them and their visions for the councils is also going to be important, and also something that we need to take into account in our future working. I wanted to pick up on item 1.5 in the list, which in some ways I think is one of the most crucial ones for me. That's the opportunity to clarify and rebuild the different roles across our very complex local government landscape. And I think that the changes at the combined authority, along with the changes at this council, give a real opportunity for rethinking how we work together. And that's an opportunity that I think it's crucial that we take, and we take quickly. I think we're making good steps on that journey, but again, because it's work we need to do with other partners, it's going to be a process that we undergo, and we need to have some really deep conversations with those partners about how we make sure that we're not duplicating too much effort, that we're really working as a team to get the best for Cambridgeshire, which I think is something that hasn't happened as effectively as it should have done over the past 4 years. So I think there is some really exciting stuff here, some really exciting work going forward, and I'm looking forward to the next stages of this process. So I think probably that's all that needs to be said on this item, and we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which I think is probably the joint agreement, the joint administration action tracker. Is that right, Amanda? So over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Chair, could I just ask whether something could be done about the blind there? 'Cause it's the
I
sunshine
absolutely
and
don't know the
lighting
answer to that
features
question,
and-
Lorna. Could we ask whether somebody could come in and see whether there is a blind that could go up to stop the sun shining people's eyes? Thank you, Sue. I thought there was probably lots of technology, but I don't know how it works. Sue's going to go and investigate. Amanda.
Chair.
I assumed it was a spotlight
Sorry.
just for me.
Steve.
Chair, I appreciate it's only a technicality, but isn't it appropriate that we actually go to the recommendations and agree them? I mean, I know it's pretty unanimous, but isn't that the normal process?
That is the normal. Well, I don't think it says.
We have two recommendations: discuss, develop, and agree actions, and monitor progress against speed.
Fine.
So we have to
Let's agree. Is there any opposition to noting and approving these actions? Fantastic. I'll take that as unanimous. Thank you, Steve. Amanda, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. So this is the joint agreement tracker item. At the last meeting of this committee, I presented the joint agreement action plan, and at that meeting, the committee agreed that a tracker would be produced to monitor the activity in the action plan, and that at a baseline position at May 2021 would be added where possible and appropriate. You'll see from the tracker presented here that we split the monitoring into two parts. So one is around activity and one is around policy. This is with the expectation that as new policies are agreed in committees, the corresponding action plans will be developed and the activity section of the report will grow. When that happens, we will have a clearly defined success criteria and performance indicator for each of the actions, and where we can, we'll add that baseline position from May 2021. We also agreed at the last committee that we would review this tracker at each of the Strategy and Resources committees until March 2022, and that we would go through the milestones that have occurred in the period since the previous committee. You will see that starting on page 51 of your agenda, there are a number of milestones for us to review in this period. Some of these sit in service committees and are being reviewed there. I can take your comments and questions against those milestones back to the relevant committee chair and officer lead. For the milestones that sit within the remit of this committee, I will take you through these briefly, as many of them have been covered by updates in the previous agenda item. So I'll just go through them one by one, the milestones for the Strategy and Resources Committee. So the first one is G1, that's on page 52, which is about the public service reform briefing and update to political leaders. So that's going back to, as Gillian described earlier, and you discussed, Chair, in your closing for the last item, the Leaders' Summit in October is very important, and that will be followed by briefings through committees. The COVID impact assessment, which describes the emerging needs of communities across Cambridgeshire and that will shape some of the conversation in the Leaders' Summit, is also very important for those future priorities, and we'll be planning a members' seminar to share this information with all members. So then we've got F3 on page 53, the review of financial strategy. The business planning paper is on today's agenda, and Tom's already taken us through that process. F11, page 59, development of the action plan and tracker. It's here, that's what we're talking about. F2, page 59, is the Peer Challenge Finance module, which was published on the 6th of September. And then we have a number of actions on page 60. F7, F10, G4, that all relate to the corporate strategy, priorities, the performance framework, and the strategic framework. And all of those relate to the reset of the corporate strategy framework, as I talked about in the previous item. We should note that there is a revised milestone of that. The draft of that, the corporate strategy, was originally intended to come to this meeting, but given the number of things that we have going on with the Leaders' Summit, the Peer Challenge, we are bringing that back later in the year in draft before it goes to full council in February. As part of that, the commercial strategy has been redrafted and discussed with chairs and vice chairs, and the performance framework is being reviewed corporately and in committees so that the performance framework relates to the new priorities. F8 on page 60 relates to transformation funded projects. The Transformation Monitoring Report is part of Agenda Item 6, the Integrated Finance Monitoring Report, and all programmes currently funded by the Transformation Fund have been reviewed and reported into relevant service committees. And then the very last one, there's a few more. G3, page 60, is the corporate peer challenge and shared services, which we've talked about. And then F4 on page 61, this land, we have an agenda item on that today. And F1 on page 61, the COVID impact assessment and recovery strategy. That will be starting with the needs and impact assessment and a seminar for all members. So those are the milestones that we have in this period. I'm happy to take any questions on those. Thank you.
Steve, were you raising your hand or watching the blinds? That's fine. Yeah, you've done them on that side. Bingo. Wonderful. Any questions on the joint agreement action planner? More questions on the blinds? Steve?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There's a number of areas in here, and I could go into the nitty-gritty, but they all boil down to one basic thing, and that's the translation of the pact into the tracking plan. And some of it's lost in translation. Now, I hope it's not deliberate, but it's very important because I know that people like Richard, yourself and Eliza spent a lot of time putting that pact together, publishing it, and it's that the administration is trying to work to, that it is the original pact that we're monitoring and not a changed pact that we have this monitoring against. I'll give you some examples. For example, the library services, you asked for all library services to be free to those on universal credit, but now we have a focus on 50p for the borrowing of books and nothing about the other library services. So it's just been watered down completely from its original intention. The highways maintenance, the original pact was talking about increased finance for highways maintenance, footpaths, cycleways, etc. Gully clearance, whereas the pact is measuring whether we actually increase the maintenance of footpaths, which seeing as a phase carried forward over from last year is inevitable anyway, and we're a bit conservative administration. And I could go through it to a certain extent. There are missing items as well, which Councillor Bowden might wish to talk to about the social value in procurement, which is a large ticket item, which I don't think is captured as well. So my suggestion is, rather than go through everything, and it would take quite some time, is that this tracker is revisited with either a new first column with the actual wording of the pact that you agreed, and then we can see as it changes over time, or alternatively, the first column in this taken out entirely and just replaced with your first pact. So either way, I'm happy to take that if the chair agrees as an action. If not, we'll move to I'll move it as a vote. Because this is all about honesty and transparency, not just with the public, but it's important as well for scrutiny, and it's also important for those PAC members that aren't here at this meeting today, that perhaps don't follow it, to realise whether they're getting what they signed up to, and that is being monitored, rather than a revised version. Thank you.
I'm going to come to Chris Bowden next, and then perhaps respond.
Thank you, Lucy. Yes, to follow up the comments just made by Steve, I was surprised when I saw the extent to which the objectives of the joint agreement and the specific wording of the joint agreement weren't reflected in the first column of the report that we got in front of us. And if we are meant to be measuring the effectiveness of the joint agreement and having a baseline, then we do need to have a measure of what the joint agreement actually says. And what struck me in particular, because it was something I was particularly interested in and have been interested in all of my time at County Council and being quite critical of all of my time in County Council, was to do with procurement. And the joint agreement had a very bold and interesting comment in it about procurement, stating that equal weight will be given in future procurement exercises to financial value and social value. That's very interesting. I've got a whole host of questions to ask about the weighting of scoring within procurement exercises, and it's something which we haven't done particularly well, in my opinion, and I don't think many councils do it particularly well, because many councils don't really understand the concept of procurement. We've got procurement specialists, but then the individuals who are managing the procurement exercises themselves within departments don't have that same specialised knowledge. And when I look at F6 in this report, this commitment to give equal weight in procurement to financial value and social value has just been lost. or it's been so heavily watered down that it really can't be tracked back to the original commitment which was made in the joint agreement. So I think it's really important that we do have this clear line from the joint agreement through this tracker. And certainly as far as procurement is concerned, it appears to me that we've either lost it or it's being deliberately and quite significantly watered down. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. I think, Steve, that you were making a proposal in your suggestion.
So I asked, because it's a very simple one to ask, I simply asked that the first column, you have an additional first column or replace the first column with the actual words of your pact, so what you're trying to measure in there. If you take it as an action plan just from the chair, perfectly satisfied with that. If you don't, because it's in the interest of honesty and transparency, which you say you uphold, then I'll have to move it as a recommendation, ask for a seconder. So it's really up to you, Chair, whether you're going to accept it or not.
Okay, I will not be accepting that, and I'm very happy to explain why in a moment. But before I do that, is there anybody else who would like to make any comments on the joint administration tracker? And I'll come back to Amanda. Amanda, are you happy for Sam to go first, and then I'll come back to you? Sam.
Yeah, thank you. It's on CE.7, page 55. It's regarding the campaign to keep state nursery schools open and schools in local authority control. I admire the aspiration. I mean, it's particularly regarding state nursery schools, though I believe there's only about 2 in Cambridgeshire anyway, because they're mostly now private enterprises. But as one of them's in Wisbech, I certainly wouldn't be going against that. The only concern I have got is when you're saying, you say about the local authority schools and you say no reduction in numbers of schools in local authority control, excluding those changed to inadequate rating, forced changes or new schools. I actually think you should remove the bit about those changed due to inadequate ratings, because we do actually have some control. Obviously, with the Education Achievement Board, we should be monitoring schools that are looking like they are potentially in danger of having bad Ofsted reports, and we should be actively working with them. We have school improvement officers and we have a process to improve school ratings, so we shouldn't be having schools going into forced academisation. Now, of course, I know that's an ideal world, things happen, and we can aspire to things that we can't always achieve, but I think to say that we aren't going to leave that in there, to say that they're going to be excluded from the numbers, I think it's a little bit of a cheat of the system, because rather than have that in there, we should be aiming to not have any schools being forced into academisation. Now, I understand why you've perhaps put that in there, because I think that perhaps someone's worried that politically you'd be almost a gotcha moment, wouldn't it, if a school was forced into academisation. I suppose we could say, oh, well, you said you didn't want to put any schools as academies, and here's one. And so I can kind of understand why you've included it, to sort of avoid those gotcha moments, but I just don't think it's the right thing to do, because I think what would be a better use of time is to actually work with the mechanisms and schemes we have already in place to try and improve the schools and stop that happening in the first place.
Thank you, Sam. Amanda, are you happy for me just to respond to that specific point, and then I'll come back to you? Just to say that I'm very glad to hear that you're supportive of the comments on nursery schools, Sam, and on the school improvement stuff. There is absolutely no question that the council will continue to work as hard as it possibly can to make sure that all of our schools maintain the good ratings that they have at the moment, and that none of them are going down the route as you suggested. Amanda.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on the point that Councillor Count raised about things getting lost, and to say actually what we've done is picked out more detail. So you'll see in some of these, if we take the libraries one for an example, libraries is free to everybody apart from the 50p reservation charge, which is the piece we're now looking at for those on universal credit. So maybe maybe we need to be more specific about how we've moved from one action to another, but what we're getting into is the detailed actions that we need to undertake. And in relation to the procurement item from Councillor Bowden, again, that's one we've split. So you'll see in F12 on page 62 that we've got a review of decision-making process for spending and investments are equally weighted for social, environmental and financial criteria. So it could be that things have moved from the original action plan as we've translated them into the tracker, but we have been quite careful to make sure that everything that was a statement in the action plan has been pulled through either into activity or policy.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Steve, I've made it clear that I'm not willing to take that suggestion from the chair. I'm going to explain now that the Joint Administration Agreement is a published document. It's out there for anybody who wishes to read it to be able to read it. I don't think there's any need for us to put anything additional in this action, in this tracker that we have. As Amanda says, it covers the detail. So I'm perfectly happy to leave this as it is. I don't know whether you want to push that to the vote or not.
Yes, please. And I must say I was a little bit dissatisfied with the answer, the response we got. So if I take a specific example, the pact, which I know that Labour in particular, Richard, Lisa, are very keen on, we will continue to provide free school meals for eligible children during the school holidays. That's what's in your pact. What we've got in the tracker is you're going to do school vouchers in summer 21, which was paid for the Conservative government, and then you're going to bring something forward to look at half term. That is not the same as your pact whatsoever. And if we have to do this at every meeting because you don't put in a first front line of what we are, then we'll be spending a lot of time saying what you originally said and how it's changed, rather than spending time on the action plan. So I'm disappointed you haven't agreed to it automatically. We have heard from Amanda Askham that some of those may have been moved about a bit, but then people can see clearly. And you're all about, we heard Councillor Dupre at full council talking about honesty and transparency. If it's transparency, why would you object to putting your own words alongside these words? I don't understand. So therefore I formally propose that a new column be added on the left hand side of the words of the pact that the joint administration claim we're working to, and that's my proposal. I'm asking for a seconder. Thank you.
I'll happily second, Chair.
Okay, that proposal's been formally proposed and seconded. I'm happy to go straight to a vote, or happy to take any further comments on it if necessary. Okay, we'll move to a vote on that then. Those in favour of the proposal from Councillor Count, please raise their hands. So that's 7 members. With those against, please raise their hands. And that's 8, so that's fallen. Are there any further comments on the joint agreement tracker? Sam?
Yes, thank you. You didn't properly answer my point. To academies, even if it's because they've failed to meet specific criteria. Because actually what you've got in there is saying if you fail as an administration, or there's factors outside your control and a school requires improvement and the DfE steps in and makes it academised, no one will know about it on your tracker because the numbers won't be shown. So I would suggest that you would just, all that needs removing is the bit that says excluding those changed due to inadequate rating. It's just those few words I think needs removing, because I think that needs to be in the tracker for it to be accurate.
Again, I'm not... Edna. And then Lorna.
Thank you. I just wanted to voice my support for the way in which the tracker is presented. It is a complex matter which takes a lot of thought and care and consideration to think how to take what was a broad statement and put it into manageable chunks with timelines, with accountability. And I think it's been a really good job done, and thank you very much for the work that's been done on it.
Thank you, Edna. Lorna?
Thank you. Yes, two points. I'd like to agree with Edna about the way in which this is laid out. The Joint Administration Agreement is an agreement for a 4-year term. and the ambitions in that are a 4-year term. This document shows us the milestones that we're setting step by step along that path to the 4 years, which is why we have the statements and the updates in there, that we have the ambitions for the next few months, the next 6, 12 months, whatever, as steps on the road to achieving our overall ambitions as publicly set out in the Joint Administration Agreement for everyone to see, utterly transparent. The specific point I wanted to make was about Councillor Hoy's comments, and I'm not on Children and Young People Committee, and I don't think I ever have been, but to me the absolute scandal in all of this is that schools which have a difficult, challenging Ofsted are forced into academisation, as if that was somehow a route to actually improving the education received by children in those schools. We know that, A, not to be the case, B, if anything, I think on national statistics, probably the reverse. That is the scandal, and that is the thing we must continue to press government to address. But in the meantime, I think it is bad practice to set out in a tracker of this sort targets for things that are totally outside one's control. And I take Councillor Hoy's point that we need to be constantly working with schools to ensure that they retain the level of performance that will keep them within local authority control if they wish to be. But we cannot control the point at which an Ofsted will result in the government forcing a school into academisation. That's a government action, not ours. And I think we cannot hold ourselves accountable for that. We merely have to press, firstly, the government not to be so silly, and secondly, to continue to work, as we always have, to ensure that schools are supported to give the best possible education to their children. Now, this is a tracker around some of the fundamental things we've committed. It doesn't track absolutely everything that we do. So I'm reluctant to fling extra things in there, but as the chair has said, officers continue to work in supporting schools, and I'm very grateful that they continue to do so. I don't think we need to track that, and I don't think we should take responsibility for the decisions of others.
Thank you. I've got Josh next, and then Sam again.
Thank you, Chair. Interesting point from Councillor Dupre that local authority schools' performance is completely out of our control. I'm sure that will be noted by some people.
So
the point I wish
of personal explanation, Chair, that is absolutely not what I said.
That's exactly what you said, Councillor Dupre. So that wasn't the point I was going to make, Chair. In the interest of transparency, obviously you're not agreeing to the recommendation, which would have been to clearly, for the public, and this is a public document, have an additional column so that people understood your pledge against these actions, which quite honestly is, quite astonishing when you start out administration with the words of openness and transparency, that simple request was rejected with no comment from any of your members. However, in the interest of trying to get some kind of way of making this document more accessible to the public in a collaborative approach, it would be therefore, as we see with lots of tracker documents, helpful for the public to look at these actions and understand whether these actions are aligned, not aligned, or partly aligned with the pledges you made. So would you agree to having a section which simply highlighted, as it would with a RAG rating or something similar, when these actions are aligned or not aligned with your pledges? Because that would be a simple way in which the public could track which direction you were going in and when you were able to achieve your pledges. It's not a stance for me to try and make life difficult, much more that this document needs to be understood in the context. And I think even coming from Councillor Count's comments and then the explanation provided by Amanda, it's not obvious. It's definitely not obvious. And so if this is going to be a document which is accessible, and in Amanda's own words, said that this obviously needs to be made clearer, well then let's make it clearer by putting when these actions are aligned, not aligned, or partly aligned. It's quite a simple request, and I hope, Chair, you'll accept that.
Councillor Hoy.
Yeah, I don't agree with what Councillor Dupre said when you're saying we shouldn't be separating things that we are going to track, because actually that's exactly what you've done. Because the first part of the point says no reduction in numbers of schools in LA control. That's fine, that's clear, that's measurable, that's very clear. But then there's an extra brackets after that saying excluding those changed to inadequate. So you have actually made a specific exception. Now I understand the point that you've made. you don't have power to stop the academisation. That is a government process. I understand that, okay? I'm not disputing that. I don't agree that there's nothing that can be done before that. We do have lots of things that can be done before that. And I think for me, the pure reason this is in there for me is because you don't want to actually be measured on anything. You just want to make a political statement to say, we don't like academies, we just want local authority schools, which is fine if that's the statement that you want to make, but just make the statement. Don't put a false thing in here that's completely useless and immeasurable. And also, it goes against what you're also saying in CYP, which is, oh, we want to support and work with academies. Well, do you? Because 1 minute you're saying that you don't really like academies and that it should all be local authority school, and the next minute, the academies are great. So I think, A, you need to decide what your politics are and what line you're sticking to, and B, at least be honest and say that this is just purely a political document. It's not about measuring anything of value whatsoever, because you've made a point of excluding one thing which is actually an important factor to know.
Richard.
This started off on what I thought was a very good piece of scrutiny. I welcome what Councillor Count said right at the beginning, but I think the danger is this is going to unravel into a sort of fairly less constructive political bun fight. Clearly, we are in favour of keeping schools in local authority control, but clearly a lot have moved to academies, and we should care about children's education in academies. I don't think that should be a controversial statement, and I don't think we should be arguing about that. On the point made by Josh Sherman about alignment, clearly the answer is 100% aligned. All this work hasn't happened because it's not aligned. So that's just obviously the answer to that. What the opposition are picking away at, and I think you're doing your job, I don't criticise that, is what's missing, or what, as Councillor Dupre has said, will be over a slightly longer period than the period that this document is for. It's not unusual for people to look at two documents in conjunction with each other. Otherwise, we're going to have a report that's got every sentence of the joint agreement every time. But it's fair that you hold us to account on it. I don't think that we should object to that whatsoever. But taking the example that Councillor Bowden came forward with about procurement, I am particularly enthusiastic, procurement and contracting, I'm particularly enthusiastic about that, and I welcome his interest in it. You know, it is clearly in there in the action tracker, and there will be a review, and Tom Kelly is going to be leading it. And when we get into the detail of that review, that's the time then to see whether we've upheld what we've committed ourselves to. I don't think that the picking away at the wording of this document is the right way to do that.
Thank you. Amanda.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Could I just want to make a suggestion that the numbers down the left-hand side relate back to the action plan which was presented at the last committee, and the action plan at the last committee clearly has the words of the joint agreement in each of these sections with the actions that flow from it. So we could simply include the action plan as an appendix, which I maybe should have done to this report, every time we bring this report. So it's a very simple cross-reference against the words that came from the joint agreement.
Thank you. That sounds like a very constructive suggestion. I think we've spent quite a long time discussing the details of the layout of a document. So I'd quite like to bring this to a close. Councillor Count, you raised your hand, and
I was just going to say, if it's as easy as putting a link in where we have to go to two documents, why couldn't you have voted and accepted putting the words in the left-hand column as suggested?
Josh, did you want one final comment?
Chair, I think that, again, this is, if you take C8 at 52, if you use the point that Amanda just raised around C8 being in your pledge and referencing to your pledge, the next comment is identifying budget implications and options for removing 50p charge, and then it says that 50p charge will be reserving books. That doesn't indicate whether your actions are partly or wholly aligned to the pledge. And that's the point which is important, because it does need to be that when looking back at this document, because this document, if it were to change, we need to know that these actions that you're taking are aligned with the pledges. That's simple. I don't understand the resistance to that.
Okay, I think we've had quite a significant debate on this. I'm just going to say a couple of things in summing up. The first is that this tracker is a working document. It's going to need to respond to circumstances and situations. I think that the academisation discussion that we've just had is an example of that. One of the discussions and debates I was having during the previous week was about whether there was going to be a demand for total academisation for all schools. Clearly that would be something imposed from outside. We would have to respond from it. I'm hoping, given the massive reshuffle, that will be something we won't have to spend a great deal of time discussing, but we are going to need to respond as an administration to what is going on over the next 4 years, and this tracker is going to have to respond to circumstances and situations outside our control, and we need to recognise that. And that as a working document, it is going to have to be responsive. One of the ways in which it has also to be responsive is in responding to the very severe financial constraints that have been left to the administration by the previous administration. Obviously, as a responsible manager of this council with a clear ambition to set a long-term financial strategy, which is in the interests of all the residents of Cambridgeshire, we have to take that into account in our decision making, and that again is going to have to be part of the process of how we meet our goals over the next 4 years. So this is a working document. It's not something that's set in stone. It needs to remain that. I think we've had a sufficient discussion on it. I think it's unfortunate that so much of that discussion has been about the layout of a document and whether or not we put in an additional column, rather than the work that the council is actually trying to do in terms of ensuring that our schools are good, in terms of ensuring that children get fed in the summer and in other school holidays. I mean, there's a huge amount of work that has been done by officers of the council in responding to not only in producing a document but actually delivering for people in Cambridgeshire, and I'm very proud of that work. I'm very proud of the level of detail that's been achieved in a very short time over the summer in delivering on that programme. So I would like to add to what Edna said in expressing my gratitude to the officers of the council who have picked up on the intention of the joint administration agreement and really worked with it to see how quickly we can deliver on those things. And I think it's been really impressive the way in which the officer team at the council have responded to that work. Just to move to the final part on this debate, what we have done is reviewed and monitored against the actions identified in the Joint Agreement Action Plan. So I hope that at least some of that reviewing has gone on. And thank you to Amanda for her excellent introduction of that. I think it's slightly a shame that so much of the debate ended up being about the layout of the document rather than about the actions themselves. Is there any further comment, or can we move on to item 6? Okay, I think we'll move on to item 6. Thank you very much for your comments on that. Yes.
Chair, we've been dragged over to Auchenbury Hall because it's a decision-making meeting. I know that we're probably all going to vote in respect to this, but you do have to do that, otherwise we're not making any decisions. So you've just mentioned the recommendations. Are we all in agreement? That's all it takes, Chair.
I'm not aware that was there a vote on this one, Michelle? I'm happy to take one, but...
There's a recommendation in the paper. If there's a recommendation, there's a vote. You don't actually have to ask for a show of hands, but you have to ask at the very least if we're all agreed. It is a decision-making meeting.
There is a recommendation, yeah.
Okay. Would those in favour of accepting the report please show their hands? Thank you. Okay, we would now move on to some key decisions. The next is the Integrated Finance Monitoring Report for the period ending the 31st of July 2021. The Assistant Director of Finance, was it the Assistant Director of Finance will introduce this report. Thank you.
Good morning. Hello. I can hear myself, so that's working. I will keep the introduction relatively brief. This is the Integrated Finance Monitoring Report for the end of July. This is part of the regular suite of finance monitoring reports we produce regularly, building on the Directorate departmental monitoring reports that go to the service committees. It shows the key financial information along with some other information as well, summarising the revenue and capital position of the Council. Page 69 of the report sets out the really headline figures. So just to run through those briefly, the forecast revenue position for the council at the end of July is a £930,000 underspend. That's about 0.2% of the budget. On the capital side, it's about a £1 million underspend, about 0.6% of the budget. That page also sets out the key activity information, service user information in the main demand-led budgets. Those show generally an upward trajectory, but again, those are generally within the budgets that have been set for those services. I would say that the ongoing effects of COVID continue to make forecasting and financial monitoring quite challenging at the moment. The report also, in two appendices, contains the regular transformation fund monitoring report and the individual finance monitoring report for those services that this committee has direct oversight of. The report, as well as summarising the key overview of the financial position, has a number of recommendations, which I'll run through in a few groups briefly again. So recommendations A, E and F, and I should say these are all set out, as you'll see from the points in the report, they're set out in a bit more detail. Recommendations A, E and F are just for the committee to note the receipt of some grants and how those have been allocated. Recommendation B deals with an investment made into biodiversity activities. So this was made under the Chief Finance Officer's delegated authority following a request from the Chair and Vice Chair of Energy and Green Investment Committee. It allocates £109,000 of funding this financial year for staffing activities, biodiversity audit work and site repairs following urgent need to progress with priorities under the climate change and environment strategy to increase biodiversity net gain and to follow the increased use of public open spaces in Cambridgeshire, particularly Cambridgeshire County Council owned scheduled monuments. Recommendation C deals with writing off two relatively large debts owed by the estates of people who were in receipt of council-funded social care, where they were due to make a statutory contribution to their care. The report sets out the specific circumstances of those cases that have led to write-offs being required. I would just say, following that the council does continue to collect social care contributions from thousands of people every week, totalling tens of millions of pounds every year. Recommendations D, G and K deal with changes to capital budgets and allocations, including further potential borrowing. D and G are set out in the report. Recommendation K, due to the nature of the capital spend, is set out in a confidential appendix. Recommendations H and I I've referred to already. They are the Transformation Fund Monitoring Report and the Corporate Services Finance Monitoring Report. And finally, recommendation J deals with the specific situation with regards to a council-owned property in Wisbech. Again, the detail is set out in the confidential appendix relating to that item. I shall leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I could just say to members, which I probably should have said at the start, that if anybody wishes to discuss exempt appendices 6 and 7, it will be necessary to exclude the press and public. So if you could just make it clear if you do wish to discuss those exempt appendices before we start discussing them. Steve.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would like to discuss some information in the confidential appendices. So whether you wish to handle all the papers in the public domain and move that to the end, or move the IRP to the end, I don't really know how you want to do it. But the other point I'd like to make is, to the best of my knowledge, we received those confidential papers after yesterday late morning, and I don't really find that very acceptable.
Okay, thank you for the information that you would like to discuss those exempt appendices. I think we will take the rest of the discussion now, and then we'll come back to that at the end of the meeting, if that's okay. So is there any further discussion on other items on this paper? Steve.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to just examine the biodiversity activities in 6.2, which clearly, before anybody starts tweeting, I'm in favour of all the actions, etc. It's the nature of the request and the actual where the funds are coming from. So the nature of the request is chairs and vice chairs spoke to other chairs and vice chairs, and then the request for funding was put here for approval from a transformation fund, which I'll I'll talk about. In the peer report response, it talks about chairs and vice chairs using the committee system. And from, as far as I can tell from the actual recommendation, this is just coming directly because chairs and vice chairs are doing what they feel is right without the use of the committee system, which means there's no scrutiny. So I'd just like to check, did this go through the committee system, or is it just because chairs and vice chairs get together and make requests, please? The second point I'd like to make about that one is the transformation fund. As far as I can understand, this seems to be drawing out money from the transformation fund because there's money in there. It seems to describe it as I don't know. The funds have been made available by way of reallocation of reserves from the transformation fund and fall within the delegation limit for officers. I'm not sure if there's if these reserves are some kind of specific biodiversity reserves in the transformation fund, which I'm unaware of, or simply the transformation fund. If they're the transformation fund was set up by changing the minimum revenue provision, which to many people do not probably relate to what that means. And that means that the borrowing the council had, say if you was paying something off in 20 years, we changed to paying it off in 40 years. And that made sense for things like a school, maybe a road, you'd expect a 40-year life. So accepted that, and that gave us some revenue flexibility. But we only did that through full council on the major premise that we would use that primarily to reduce spending commitments for those same people in the future by, a stitch in time saves nine. It has on occasion been used for other things, such as to meet the budget gap because it was necessary. But it was very, very clearly explained when it was used for the primary purpose or for a secondary purpose. So I'd like some clarity. Is there some sort of minor reserve set up in the transformation fund, or is just this the first poach from the transformation fund, and because it's under an officer limit, it's okay just to go ahead with it? And then the second point about the chairs, please, or the first point about the chairs, please.
Tom, are you happy?
Yep, thank you. So the I think the future of the transformation fund is a significant issue really for the financial planning that's to come through committee later in the autumn. So Councillor Count is absolutely right in everything he says about the history of how the fund arrived, but at this moment in time we don't have an overall target balance, and I think there are kind of things that we should continuously be looking at around the kind of criteria and access to that fund. So the way it's worded in front of you today, this isn't a transformation fund investment, it is a reallocation of funds that aren't currently allocated to anything in the transformation space and moving that across to its own reserve for biodiversity activities. And I understand the way we're handling it in this fashion partly relates to the kind of the urgency and the kind of seasonality of completing some of this work. So it was this wouldn't necessarily be how we normally approach it, but that is why it's been put forward in that way. And of course the transparency comes through by reporting it to this committee.
Thank you very much. I'd absolutely like to echo that this is an unusual situation in that this money is being used, is needed urgently to be to do work over the course of this winter, and that's why it's coming forward in this way rather than in the normal budget process. So I think it is an unusual way of dealing with it. It's not how I would expect us to deal with many situations in the future, but I also think that it's absolutely right that we should be treating this as an urgent priority for this winter. It's not only urgent because it's part of dealing with an urgent biodiversity and climate crisis, but also because actually these are some of our most precious parks and open spaces which have been under huge pressure as a result of the COVID pandemic. So there are a variety of different reasons why it's particularly urgent that this should be done this winter, and that's why it's being brought forward today. So I hope that that's a sufficient explanation.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Fully understood the explanation. I support the expenditure. I made that clear at the first place, but it goes back to that point about honesty and transparency, doesn't it? The way it was worded, the way it came about, if I hadn't picked up on it, it just seemed like there was a reserve set aside for that specific purpose. That's how it was worded. It seemed as if it was okay that we just have chairs meeting in back rooms and allocating reserves. And that has been acknowledged is not the normal way that we do things, and I think these things should be highlighted, and that's as Richard quite rightly complimented us, the job of the scrutiny part of the opposition is to highlight that things are not as open and transparent as we would like. If I could move please to the building maintenance programme, 8.8, where works have an environment benefit as a result of improved insulation. Consideration will be given as to whether these are eligible for funding from the existing environmental fund within the capital budget. As you will recall, Chair, the environmental fund, some £16 million put forward by the previous Conservative administration, unfortunately voted against by the opposition parties, all of them, is the fund that we're talking about. My question here is, who decides whether that's eligible or not? Because I would hate to see this picked away, which is an environmental fund, for what is ordinary council business. Now, if there's a true environmental gain, then I'll support that as a true environmental use of that fund. However, if it's simply a way of shunting costs into somewhere that's easier to pay for it, and it's done behind closed doors, and I wouldn't be happy. So is that going to go to the environment and green environment, what are we calling it these days? Thank you. Environment and Green Investment Committee to analyse that decision, or will that be made also behind closed doors amongst chairs and vice chairs?
Tom, just before you come in, can I just pick up the point you were making about the lack of clarity in the wording? These papers all went to the spokes committees, and it would have been very helpful if at that meeting any lack of clarity had been flagged up, because it would have been perfectly possible to fix that at that point.
Chair, we're not here to do your work for you. We're here to scrutinise and analyse these your papers. It's got your name on it.
And to me, it was perfectly clear what was meant. Tom.
Thank you. So on 8.8, I think it's actually unlikely now that these immediate proposals for building maintenance will receive environment fund funding, having looked at it in some more detail. The environment fund criteria, I understand, are coming back to EGI, and it's absolutely for that committee to make any decisions about changing the criteria or updating them. So that would need to happen before items of this type would be eligible. And then I would just make the general point, because we've been looking at the government's announcement of the third wave of public sector decarbonisation, and they do very much emphasise a whole building approach. And within that, there is, clearly there is some scope to consider insulation improvements as part of a whole package of works for a building. So I think it is something we need to consider, but it will go through EGI were there to be any change in the criteria proposed.
Thank you. Josh.
Sorry, Chair. I don't think Councillor Camp's first point was answered by yourself. The recommendation at 6.2, presumably this urgent issue around tackling climate change is not come as a surprise, I hope, to administration. And the works that have been required for this money have now been given the excuse that it's related to the COVID pandemic. Again, shouldn't have come as a surprise to anybody that we've been going through those challenges. So therefore, there should have been ample opportunity, with obviously the administration's keenness to reduce meetings, for the committee to consider exactly this proposal, what it means, how the money will be spent, and therefore the allocation from what should be money for transformation, and we've now heard isn't transformative at all, is just raiding a pot. So I'd be interested to know what committee this went through, and if it didn't, how that is transparent in any way that decisions have been made by chairs and then being agreed in this format.
Tom.
Well, I'm
Sorry, Chair, that question was for you, and I don't think the Chief Finance Officer should be answering on behalf of you when this has been delegated to Chair, so you should be aware of this, Chair.
He asked me to come in, and therefore I would like to allow him to.
Just to make one technical point, I guess. So from a compliance perspective with the scheme of financial management, reallocations of this type up to 175k are a matter for officers, so it doesn't need committee sign off, and actually by reporting it through to this committee we've kind of gone above and beyond that requirement to try and act both transparently and in a way that's agile. But I'll leave my comments there.
I don't think I could add much more than that. I think that was very clear.
Well, Chair, then for absolute clarity, it's going to be the administration's normal process to make decisions around £175,000 allocations without any scrutiny or transparency through the committee structure. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, Elisa.
I would like to ask if it's possible to clarify what the question is at this point, because we heard that the wording was unclear when the wording actually doesn't say anything about what those funds were previously supposed to be for, themselves being unallocated, and therefore the implication that they were supposed to be something else. I'm not entirely sure where that comes from. And second of all, it says, whereabouts are we? Reallocated, I lost it now. I did lose it. But what Thomas just said, the funds were made available, and they were made available through a process that usually, and by which I mean it was like that before May, is officer delegated. So if there's a question about transparency, I would like to have the actual question now, because I'm really starting to lose the ability to understand what the problem is. Thank you.
I think I will come back to Councillor Count, and then I will answer Josh's point. And then I think unless there are any more questions on other points on this agenda other than 6B and the way in which that decision is being made, then we'll move on. But I don't want to shut down debate on the rest of the agenda, but I think at this point we've had quite a lot of discussion on. Councillor Count.
Thank you. On the point about the clarity about the fund, the funds have been made available by a way of reallocation of reserves from the Transformation Fund. So, whereas in fact, after questioning, the funds have been made available by way of reallocation from the Transformation Fund. There are no separate reserves held in the Transformation Fund for this purpose. There are no separate reserves. You could either call it a reserve or a transformation fund, but it indicated as if there was some kind of pot inside the transformation fund for this, which is not the normal use of the transformation fund. Now, I do agree with Tom, it falls within a delegation limit for officers. However, it would be normal if you are to use something not for the purpose for which it was designed, the transformation fund, which I understand will be revisited at some point in time to highlight that as open and transparency. Sometimes when we raise these things, it seems that people find it difficult to follow, but I think that the public will thank us for holding the current administration to account on £175,000 worth of spending, where it's coming from, the draining of a fund.
Okay, I think there has been some explanation about where this money is coming from and why it was coming in this format. I think that the key point here is that this is below the officer delegation and that it is coming to this meeting for exactly the kind of transparency that you're talking about. And the reason for it is the urgent need for this work to be done over the winter. I think we've covered that quite thoroughly. I'm really pleased that we are doing this work. I think, again, I'd like to come back to the actual topic that we're discussing, which is that work is being done to improve biodiversity in Cambridgeshire, work which is urgently needed. I don't think there's been any opposition to the work itself, and I'm very glad that that is the case, that there is support for this work, which we do need to do. The mechanism by which the money is allocated is undoubtedly important, but I think getting the work done is significantly more important, and I'm very pleased that we are moving ahead with it. Are there any other comments on any other part of this paper? Because if not, I think we'll leave the discussion of the appendices till the end of the meeting, and we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, having taken a vote on these items. Okay, in which case we will move to the vote. So the Strategy and Resources Committee is recommended to note items A to K, and I'm not going to read them all out because they're all printed and published. So if I could see all of those in favour of the accepting the Strategy and Resources report.
Sorry, this is A to I.
A to I, apologies,
K.
yes, and K. So all of those items, please. I think that's unanimous. Are there any against? Thank you. So we will now move to item 8 on the agenda, which is the contract commencement and renewals. And the Chief Financial Officer will introduce these reports. And I understand that Lindsay Fulcher, John Clayton, Tony Cooper and Sam Smith are available to answer any queries on their individual reports. So, Tom.
Are we taking this before item 7, Chair?
Oh, apologies. Yeah. No, let's go back to item 7. Item 7 is this land monitoring update and the land at Soham North, and certainly there will be a few people who would not want me to miss that on the agenda. The Chief Financial Officer will again introduce this report, and the Council's nominees as Board Directors, Councillor Neil Goff and the Director for Place and Economy, actually I think it's Tony Cooper, are also here to answer questions, and Steve. So. Tom, thank you.
Yes, thank you. So there's 2 aspects to the report really, and as you say, Chair, a number of people to support on different sections. So Tony, along with myself, are on the shareholder side. Steve Cox and Councillor Goff are the council's nominees on the board, and we've also got Ian Trafford from the Education Directorate who can help with the Soham North element. So firstly, on the monitoring updates, I draw the committee's attention to 2 aspects of the report that we have in front of us today. First of all, this is the first time I'm aware of that we've published an abbreviated business plan for the company. So that's at page 147, and kind of talks through the progress that the company's made over the last year since they did a significant business plan refresh in which the predecessor C&I committee considered in April 2020. And very briefly, that business plan covers the company's activity across direct development of sites, disposal of other sites that it's considered on in alignment with its strategy, master developing, which is the land, kind of the place shaping infrastructure, and then development of the rest of the site by partner developers, as well as land promotion and strategic land, which is an increasingly important part of the company's strategy in the latter part of the cycle, latter part of the decade. The other significant aspect confirmed in the report is the commencement of the review by Everson Young, which I've already referred to. Just by way of overview of the monitoring updates, the company reports a number of successes this year at implementing the 2020 business plan, in particular achieving disposal values for properties that it's not developing directly in excess of the expected values. We see through the report some progress with construction and also the validation of individual assumptions. So the report reports back on work that's been done to look at the Little Haddam site in Hertfordshire, and the external review we've already had on that kind of backs up the assumptions the company's made. And the company continues to make a very important contribution to the council's budget by way of interest on the loans that we see. Set against that, clearly there is a significant amount of money on loan to this land. The company, as we see in their accounts, has net liabilities at the moment, and an exposure to a number of principal risks that are set out in section 2.9 of the report. So together with the the factors identified through the peer review and the joint agreement, and that we need to keep an ever-present assessment of that risk, and undertake the annual kind of due diligence in a wholesale way across the whole of the business plan. It's, I think, timely to recheck the assumptions, and that is a big part of what Avison Young will be doing for us as their review progresses. I'd also just look ahead to the upcoming shareholder meeting, which the company is hosting at the end of this month, and to which all members of this committee are invited as the shareholder. I think that's probably all I'll say by way of introduction on that first part of the report. It may be that Steve Cox and Councillor Goff want to give their impressions coming into the company relatively recently. And then the second part of the report deals more specifically with the key decision, which is around land at Soham North. This is land that the council sold to this land in 2018. The significant development since then, I think, is that an expected development elsewhere in Soham, unconnected to this property, hasn't progressed in that way, and that's led to a reconsideration of where primary provision will come from in the town, and kind of updating our estimates of future need. So on that basis, there's been a recommendation from Education that it would be sensible to reacquire part of the plot that was previously sold to this land, where it's adjacent to the Shade Primary School, and the proposal before the committee is to do that, and we'll be repurchasing it. Obviously only part of what we previously sold, but the value assessed in a similar way to as it was sold initially, which is to go out to an external valuer and have an independently assessed value. So I think those are the main issues in the report we have before us today.
Thank you very much. Do any of the other officers want to come in before I move to the debate? Steve.
Chair, if I may, Tom suggested I might give my reflections on being a board member of this land. Would that be helpful now?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. So I joined this land board about 18 months ago, so January 2020. And just I think in sort of brief summary, I think over that period there's been a continuous improvement in the management and governance of the company. I think the changes that have been made to bring in a finance director, the change of leadership with the current acting chief executive, have brought clearer direction that I think the business plan now is setting out. I still think there are some challenges ahead, no doubt, with a company that is still in its startup phase, I would suggest, and that is around the ongoing delivery rates, which I know the board would recognise, but there is again progress being made in that respect. The delivery of affordable housing is good, 36% of the schemes that have been identified so far, but further challenges ahead that all house builders are facing around delivering around zero carbon developments, also around the move towards place shaping on some of the larger sites. I think is an interesting direction, and one that I think the company is taking forward in a very positive way. And I think in terms of what we would, I imagine members would like to see from a development company, it is delivering high quality communities with affordable housing at the appropriate level, and also addressing zero carbon ambitions as well. So reflections in brief are those, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bowden and then Councillor Schumann.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I'd like to turn, if possible, to recommendation B, please, which states that it's recommended that the committee permit the sale of property by this land at Burwell and Words Causeway in accordance with the business plan. And the wording of that recommendation worries me, and I think it's important that we look at governance issues here, particularly when we're talking about the relationship between this Land Limited, which is a separate limited company, and its shareholder, Cambridgeshire County Council. And I don't feel that the wording which has been put here is correct. And I wonder if we could have a little exploration here about what it is we're actually doing, because I don't believe that we are, or should be, or can be legally giving permission to this land limited to sell the property. I think the wording is actually wrong. Possibly some exploration of that may be helpful to get more accurate wording as to what it is which is being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom, do you want to respond to that?
Yep. So I did think quite carefully about the wording for this because it is an important issue, as Councillor Bowden highlights. So this is land that is already owned by this land. The wording we have here actually mirrors the recommendation we had in April 2020 in relation to other properties. I probably should have given more detail on this in introduction, but the April 2020 report permits the disposal of a number of properties, and at that point the business plan adopted this master developer approach, which is the approach on the three largest sites at Burwell, Warts Causeway and Soham East. And at Burwell and Warts Causeway, we're now in a position, or the company now in a position, where they are ready to start releasing parcels of the land there to other developers. It's absolutely correct to say that there needs to be an arm's length relationship in terms of the current setup, and that it is a decision for the company to reach about the timing and the nature of those sales. But the council does retain certain rights, and they're principally around the mortgages. So we hold security on those properties at the moment, and clearly to enable a sale, the mortgages will need to be released. And we also have preemption rights, which principally protect us from an inappropriate sale, so perhaps at undervalue or giving us the option to buy back, as we have at Soham North, where we've subsequently changed our position on service need. So it's deliberately worded not to be around approving or agreeing the sale, because it would be inappropriate for the council to overstep that line. But it permits the consequences of the sale as they relate to releasing the legal charges in particular.
Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, that was exactly my understanding of what is being proposed here, but the use of the word permit is at best somewhat ambiguous. And may I suggest, and I don't disagree in the slightest with the way in which Tom described it, may I suggest it would be more appropriate to say that we recommend in B that the committee abrogate the council's preemption rights, thus giving the opportunity to this land limited to sell the property at Burwell and Wards Causeway in accordance with the business plan, and consequential amendments to legal charges on those properties. That legally is the thing which we're actually doing. We're not giving permission to this land to sell. And it's really important that we get that distinction clear. So we're abrogating the council's preemption rights.
Yes, I think that would be acceptable. It covers off both the preemption and the legal charge. So.
I'm going to give Michelle a moment or two to write that down and consider it. I have some quite serious reservations about changing the wording of the recommendation at this point, particularly in relation to something which is legally so sensitive. And I think it would have been very, very helpful if you had made this point yesterday or previously, Councillor Bowden, so that we could have got it looked at. It is slightly unfortunate to have only made it at this point in the meeting, at which point it's very difficult to for member services to make sure that they've got the wording right, and for us to make absolutely sure that we've got the legal wording absolutely correct. And I am a little bit uncomfortable about changing the wording of a recommendation, particularly in something as sensitive as this at this point in the process.
Yeah, and I think that is a fair point, and I have to say I'm comfortable with the wording that's been put forward, and the company does need the council's permission because of the mortgage and the preemption agreement to make to step forward with these sales. So I think I've been thinking whether it's as simple as just changing the word permit, but thinking about it on the spot, I've sort of come back to permit being probably the right word, actually.
Councillor Count.
Yeah, I too am very worried by the word permit, exactly the points that Councillor Bowden made, and I would prefer that we actually put forward the one, the abrogate thing. But in order to ease both parties, we could perhaps put in at the end, subject to legal advice, and delegate any adjustments then to our legal advice to make sure we got the right one. But your initial words here are permit the sale. That's what it says, permit the sale. Now, you don't have to move forward through the sentences and complicate that at all. Permit the sale does seem to me, now that it's been highlighted to me, I haven't seen this before, I haven't noticed it before, but now it's been highlighted to me, this does seem to put us at risk, and I don't want to do, we're here to scrutinise and assist, we're not here to make things worse, we are trying to assist, and those words, permit the sale, does that or does that not mean that we have some rights about stopping the sale? And for me, that's a clear-cut decision. I'm not happier than supporting the current wording.
So all I would say is that we, at this moment in time, we do have the facility to stop the sale because we've got the mortgages and preemption rights. So I think permit is the right word. It is the same wording that was used in April 2020 and then it has been unproblematic through the process of sale so far this year. So I think I can give the committee the reassurance that it isn't a problem. And of course, we are taking legal advice continuously as these transactions progress.
Thank you. Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Lucy. Sorry to concentrate on this, but it's actually a very important point because it relates to the relationship between this Land Limited and its shareholder. And it's vital that we get that relationship clearly right and absolutely unambiguous. Now, the problem with the word permit is it's got two different meanings. It can mean to allow, or it can mean to actively give permission, actively promote. And what we're doing here is we are allowing, we're not actively promoting. Because actively promoting, we would be interfering in the business of this Land Limited, which of course is not what we can do, nor what is being proposed that we do. But the use of the word permit is clearly ambiguous here. And that is why, if you wanted to just change one word on this to make it clearer, changing the word permitting to allowing would make it quite clear we're not giving any sort of direction to the company. Now, if we were being more technical, we'd talk about abrogating the council's preemption rights. We don't have to be that technical. Please just change the word permit to allow, and that will make it quite clear which of the meanings of permit we're actually agreeing to here.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Lorna and then I'll come back.
Thank you. I just wanted to raise a very important point. My understanding is that if we were to agree to abrogate, then if anything happened to the sale and for whatever reason it did not go ahead, we would have lost our rights in this matter. And that seems to me, therefore, a very dangerous thing to do, particularly without the benefit of legal advice. And I would be very much in favour of sticking with permit or possibly allow, but certainly not engaging in some very substantial changes to this which could compromise the position of the authority on this.
Thank you. I think my Tom, can you just remind us that permits was the word that was in there the last time that this happened?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
On that basis, I think I would prefer to stick with the current wording. Thank you. I will come back to you, Councillor Bowden, but I am going to make the point again that it would be extremely helpful if members of the opposition could give us their concerns about wording like this in advance of the meeting. That is partly what the spokes meetings are for, but there are plenty of opportunities to do that. I am extremely uncomfortable about changing wording in matters that are so crucial and so complex. I also think that this debate has absolutely highlighted the need for the review that we now have ongoing onto our relationship with this land. Councillor Bowden.
What this debate has highlighted is the need for the relationship between this Land Limited and the council to be absolutely clear-cut in the minds of everyone, but particularly in the minds of the administration who've got responsibility for running things at the moment. And I am concerned, for example, at the comments which were just made by Councillor Dupre. My understanding is, contrary to what Councillor Dupre is saying, is exactly what we are doing. We are going to be abrogating the council's preemption rights, and that is what is being proposed here. Councillor Dupre now says she's very uncomfortable about abrogating the council's preemption rights. I think we really need to get some clarity here. And that simple change of the word permit to allow will have exactly the meaning that was originally intended. And if it was wrong in 2020, then too bad. I wasn't on policy and resources then, so I wasn't in a position to be able to give a direct comment. I've got the responsibility now of trying to make sure that we do the right thing legally. And legally, you've got two different meanings of permit. Let's make sure the correct one is being used here. But let's also answer the question from Councillor Dupre. She doesn't want to abrogate the Council's preemption rights. My understanding is that's exactly what you're proposing.
Okay, we've had quite a long discussion about this word, and I remain uncomfortable about changing such a crucial piece of without legal advice. So I'm going to stick with the wording as we have it. Is there any more discussion? This is quite a large, wide-ranging item on the agenda. Is there any more discussion about the relationship with this land or about the land at Soham? Josh.
Thank you, Chair. And I can't help but mention the irony of being told to pass comment the day before would be helpful, when actually that would have been nice to be able to do on the appendix, the confidential appendix, but we didn't even have the reports yet again. But Chair, I wish to make a comment on the review, which is one of the important sections of this paper, and draw your attention to page 130 and ask whether you would be willing to consider an addition to the review A to E, the questions put, in an additional item of F, which is to ask how this land can further develop its affordable housing on its site and land owned. I know that this, in many respects, is, I'm sure, a welcome addition by the administration, because this has been a very clear steer from the administration time and time again, and previously. The previous administrations have challenged this land on its ability to deliver affordable housing. So I think it'd be very reasonable, rather than focusing on some of the other areas about speed of housing delivery, that they would also consider how they might increase, maintain, increase, however you want to word it, the affordable housing contributions on their sites.
Thank you. I think that the terms of the review are now set. And work has already started, but certainly that point that you make about the importance of this land in terms of what it can do in delivering affordable housing is absolutely something that is high on the administration's agenda. I don't think it's exactly the area that we've asked the review to look at, because we've asked the review to look back rather than forward at what this land has been doing. Tom, do you have anything else you'd like to add on that? But I think I'm right that it's already underway.
It is already underway, and I think affordable housing will be part of the discussions as kind of set through these objectives. But there are there's, in some ways, we don't need to be specific about one particular type of initiative really, and give the reviewers the scope to look across all of the different aspects of the current business plan and how they could be brought forward or modified in different ways.
I would say there's certainly the opportunity to cover it under question C there, which refers to this land strategy. Councillor Count.
Yes, my points are in the same area and around the same thing. I'd certainly say that the information we've got today, the initial questions set for the reviewer are as follows, indicates that further questions could be put. But I would like to say that I think the words objectives was used. This describes how our objectives will be met, but unfortunately they don't. So I'll give you an example. See, how could this land adapt its plans to adjust its risk appetite or strategy? I'll repeat that. How could this land adapt its plans to adjust its risk appetite or strategy? In what context? It could go in any direction it wants. I mean, you know, there's no what. Where is the actual objective here? Risk appetite. Do you want it to go up? Do you want it to go down? Strategy. Do you want to build more houses? Do you want a greater return? You know, it can go in any direction. So you have to set the context for what you're asking these questions about. I have a very simple suggestion to add the context, and that is your pact. Your pact states it will start a radical overhaul or replacement of the council's development company, this land, with the aim of redirecting it towards building genuinely affordable housing and supporting living. genuinely affordable housing and supporting living facilities. So simply to go to this company, perform the review and saying this is the context that we wish you to answer those questions would be extremely useful for the current administration to have those questions answered, rather than having some questions that you're trying to drive somewhere and have left some so open-ended it doesn't really know where it's going at all. So could I suggest that you add that in as your objective and they answer those questions in view of your ultimate objective, please?
As I've said, I think the review is already underway. I think that the context for the review is pretty clear. There is a new administration at the council, and our joint administration agreement is also clear. But as has been covered in the recent discussion, one of the things that we are reviewing is our relationship with this land and how that works in detail. And I think we need to be very careful, as Councillor Bowden was just pointing out, about how that relationship works and how much we direct the company, which I think we need to be very cautious about. Edna.
Yes, I'm very sorry to have to raise this, Chair. It is, I guess, a point of order, and that is that I can't help but notice that one of us has a persistent cough, and we have quite a low threshold for not turning up to meetings if we have symptoms that could be the virus. So I'm actually just quite concerned, and I would really like to ask what we do in these sort of circumstances.
Could I add some clarity, please? I'm sorry to say I've got a permanent lung condition that causes me to cough quite extensively. I've just been away on holiday. I've had a series of PCRs and lateral flow tests and that, and I'm completely clear of COVID. Last one I took a double one yesterday, one which was the government one, which I send off for the 2-day testing, but I don't get the results of that, and I followed that up with a lateral flow test myself to make sure I haven't got COVID anyway. But it is something I have to apologise for. I know it's irritating for those people around me, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I have been in and out of the doctors for so many years, you wouldn't believe it. I've been diagnosed with half a dozen misdiagnoses, and it is something I'm very accustomed to, but I can appreciate how worrying that is for the people around me. Let me reconfirm, I've had all the necessary tests. It's not COVID, and I wish I'd said something earlier, and I do appreciate that. I wish I'd made that clear, and I should do in future, that if I'm coughing to a meeting, please don't. I'm testing myself thoroughly. It's not COVID. So my apologies for not easing everybody's thoughts on this process.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for being so open with us. It's extremely helpful. Thank you. I think we had a question, and I hope I've answered it. If there are, Councillor Bowden, do you want to come back again?
Sorry, it may have been the question from me which hasn't been answered yet. I'm a bit confused now. I'm sorry to go back to point B, but recommendation B, it was made quite clear from Councillor Dupre, and I don't know if she was speaking on behalf of the administration as a whole or just speaking for herself, but she explained, and she was quite correct in what she said, that the abrogation of the council's preemption rights would mean that if the sale didn't go ahead, we'd be in no position at all to do anything because we'd abrogated our rights. And the impression I got was that this was being opposed by, if not the administration, then at least by Councillor Dupre. But my understanding was that this permit which is being given, which I don't like that word, but if you want to stick with it, then fine, that this permit actually will give the permission to officers to abrogate the council's preemption rights. So that's what we actually are agreeing to. That's my understanding. I'm a little bit confused. I just wonder if you could clarify exactly what the position is. Thank you.
I think Councillor Dupre may be able to clarify.
The point I was trying to make was that it's one of sequencing, and therefore you do not agree to abrogate your rights until you know that the sale is going through. That was the point I was trying to make. That makes absolute sense, and therefore it seems to me that the wording that we have in the paper is the right one.
That's really interesting to hear, and if that is Tom's understanding of what he will do, that we will not be abrogating our rights until the sale is about to go through, then that would cover that position, and I'd be perfectly happy with that.
No, that is absolutely the plan. We will have the preemption put to us at a particular point in time, and the purpose of this, the recommendation here is to permit us to respond to that in a positive way when it comes forward.
Thank you. At which point, I think we will move to the recommendations on this item. The recommendations remain as on the paper, so the committee, so those are the published recommendations. And I would now like to ask for a vote on those recommendations. Councillor Count.
Can I ask for a recommendation B to be taken separately? The reason for that is because of the we want this to go ahead, so we don't want to block the administration. You have enough votes on your side, but because our concerns were not addressed and our suggestions weren't adhered to, we fear our position would probably be best to abstain. So if you could go to B separately and take responsibility for that yourselves. Thank you.
Okay, I'm quite happy to do that. So we'll take recommendations A, C and D now, please. So all those in favour of recommendations A, C and D. And that looks as if it's unanimous. Thank you. And now to recommendation B. All those in favour of recommendation B, please. And any against? And abstentions. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much to Neil and Steve for being here to answer questions on this land, should they be needed, and Tony. Right, we will move on to item 8, which is the contract commencement and renewals. And Tom, if you would like to introduce the reports.
Thank you. So with your permission, Chair, I'll just briefly introduce these 4 items together, and then I think we will have the officers. I can see Tony's already here, and I think probably Lindsay and John Clayton are on their way, or if someone can grab them if they're not. So in items A to C under this heading, there is a permission to commence the procurement for minor works and temporary accommodation, so 2 issues relating to property, particularly facing schools. And then under the cleaning and grounds maintenance, these are the arrangements for at 82 of our buildings for cleaning and grounds maintenance. And then 2 IT items across laptops, and the council has an estate of nearly 4,000 laptops, and also the multifunctional devices which provide scanning and printing facilities in our buildings. And then D, the item relating to Opus. Again, it's about our sourcing and our strategy for procurement, but done in a different way through a partnership arrangement with other councils, including Suffolk County Council, Milton Keynes and Northamptonshire, and through a TECL arrangement in that case, continuing the partnership arrangement there, rather than go for an external led procurement. But I think quite a lot of detail in the individual reports, and at this stage a permission to commence competitive procurement, as I say, on items A, B and C, and continue that partnership approach for D. And I think we have the officers who can probably take questions in turn as they arise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if I move to members now, any comments on this, Councillor Bowden?
Thank you, Luke. So I take it we're starting off just with A, B and C, and we'll deal with D later.
If D is in private, then yes. Sorry.
No, it's not private. It's just it's of a different nature from A, B and C. A, B and C are to do with reprocurements.
I think I'm happy to take questions on any of them.
Oh, okay, fine. I'll start with 8A, but I won't ask the same question for 8B or 8C. You'll be delighted to hear. But I just want to make the point. In the paper we've just been dealing with to do with the joint administration tracking exercise, in F12 we were told that under the heading of reviewing the process for decision making on spending and investments to ensure that all decisions are equally weighted for social, environmental and financial criteria, we are told that review has been completed and mechanisms for changing decision making criteria are in place. have those new mechanisms been used in respect of agenda item 8A? Because when I look at agenda item 8A, which isn't the biggest contract in the world, let's be quite honest, not the biggest procurement exercise, but I'm just taking it as a matter as an example. If I look at that, I have to go all the way down to paragraph 4.2 to find anything at all about this procurement exercise and how it's technically going to be carried out. And then I find that all I'm told is we have and continue to receive advice and guidance from the procurement team in relation to these tender processes. Well, that doesn't tell us how this tender process is going to be carried out, how the procurement exercise is going to happen, and will it be done in accordance with the new procedures that we are told are in place. So what I'd be particularly interested to hear, I think it's important that we know this because it's not just to do with this item, it's to do with all future items as well, potentially, is there any change as far as this procurement process is concerned in the weighting which will be given between different criteria, and what action will be taken to allow for differential scoring sensitivity in the different weightings?
I think, Amanda, were you indicating? Or yeah.
Thank you. Just with a very quick point. So the milestone on that one is that it's in November 21 to come back with that new process. So the success criteria is the review is completed, but it will come. This is the strategic committee that would look at that. So the success criteria is complete when it's complete, but that won't be till November. So it's not been done yet.
So my understanding then, if I may just interpret that, Chairman, and if you can agree or not, is that the new criteria have not been adopted with respect to 8A or, for that matter, 8B or 8C. It's for the future.
I think that's correct in terms of the procurement for these ones. There has been a process looking at some of these about in relation to other aspects of the joint administration agreement, but I think in terms of that that specific item, you're correct.
I'm completely satisfied with that because that's just a practical answer to the situation. What I would request is that when we do start finding some procurement exercises which are being done in accordance with the new rules, could we please be given some significant detail in that on the points that I was raising, both about the weighting between different criteria and also how we're accounting for differential scoring sensitivity, because it's absolutely crucial when it comes to that point. May I go on to another question on D? Whenever dealing with a TechAl company, there are always issues both to do with the legality of the TechAl company and its optimal financial effectiveness. And I do have questions about this company. This company, by the way, wasn't founded in the best of circumstances. The member overview which took place, well, there wasn't any member overview which took place, and the original founding of it, together with the original loan agreements, were more than a bit one-sided, in my opinion. But that's in the past. That's what happened. The lack of member oversight was very unfortunate. Nevertheless, the whole process of setting up this company was a very sensible one. The business case was a very good one, and it's proven its worth very quickly indeed. And I've got no problems at all with any of that. But I do look both at the legality side and the financial effectiveness. And reading the report, the first question I've got is to do with the status of Peterborough, because Peterborough is specifically mentioned. Peterborough City Council is specifically mentioned here as a customer, a potential customer, and I just wonder the extent to which either Peterborough coming on board as an external customer will take us close to or even threaten the TECL limit of 20%, or is it being suggested that Peterborough may be coming on board as a shareholder within the TECL company and thereby avoiding the problems with TECL? I've no idea in the company, and I've no way of telling from the published accounts because they only file modified accounts, small company accounts. I've no way of knowing just how close we are to the TECL limit, and I don't think that there is any member oversight of this at all, because there is no member who is on the board of the company. My second concern is to do with the pricing which is taking place. Now, it's mentioned within the report that we are getting very competitive pricing here so far as the supply of staff is concerned, which is, of course, excellent. But we are ending up with a significant profit at the end of each year. You may say that's excellent because we get, as is shown in the report, we get dividends coming back, which is also very good. But it's not the most efficient way of the TechAl company working. What would be far more efficient is to avoid some or all of the corporation tax which is being paid by having lower charges, at least to members, to the members of the company, to such as ourselves, to the shareholders. So we have even lower costs which are passed on to us in terms of the staffing costs, thereby reducing, if not eliminating, the profit of the company and reducing or eliminating the money which is sent off to the exchequer. Because in the year just finished, the year ending 31st March 21, £77,000 was the corporation tax liability for the company, 59,000 the year before, and reading between the lines and the figures which have been provided to us, it's likely to be another 70,000 in this current financial year. Now, if the charges which were being made by the Teckle company to its members, including ourselves, were lower, we'd get the benefit of those lower charges coming through in terms of our staff costs, and we wouldn't be suffering indirectly the corporation tax charge. So how is this being set and by whom? And again, where is the member oversight? And when we're talking about pricing, it's perfectly permissible within a Teckle company to have two-tier pricing. That is, pricing for the members, the shareholders such as ourselves, and then pricing for third parties. So it's perfectly possible to do that. I don't know if we're doing it or not. And again, there just doesn't seem to be a mechanism for member oversight on this. I'll leave it there. I've got plenty of other questions I could ask about Opus People Solutions East Limited. But I think that these are very relevant questions for us to ask, because there doesn't seem to be any other mechanism for us to find out about it. It's only because we're talking about renewing this arrangement that we've got for at least another 5 years that this is coming before us at all. And where is the opportunity other than this for these sort of questions to be asked? And will no more questions be asked about this until 2026 or 2027? And is that really acceptable? I'm not expecting you, Chairman, by the way, to answer all of these questions personally.
Thank you. That's a good thing. I think Tom may have some answers for you, but I suspect that quite a lot of those answers will need to come back to you in the future. Tom.
Yes, if it's okay, Chairman, I think we'll that would probably be best answered through kind of a detailed briefing, which I'll work with Sue Grace, who's recently gone on to the board of Opus on. So the member oversight is through this committee, so it's perfectly appropriate that note would come back here. And indeed, the governance mirrors that in the other councils in terms of there being an officer nominee on the board. The one point I would make, and it's an interesting distinction from, say, a company like Pathfinder Legal Services, formerly LGSS Law, is actually the largest shareholder of Opus, I think, is the Opus parent company, which is owned by Suffolk County Council, and they aren't a customer of this company, so that there isn't that direct, that they do want to see the highest profit, I would think, through the company, rather than dealing with it through pricing, which is the approach that's been taken in LGSS law. But we'll set that out in a bit more detail for you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. Some useful, interesting questions for us to look into.
I didn't quite gather, will this be coming back to the next meeting? Is that the way in which we're going to be suggesting it as a paper to the next meeting so we can discuss it?
I think what Tom was suggesting was an internal briefing to start with. Is that correct?
I think given the detail requested and that some of it may be commercially sensitive as well, that would be a good first step, and then we can agree where to go from there.
Thank you. Any further questions on these procurements, Steve?
Working from memory, Chair. 8A. No, it's one of these forced shutdowns, I think. 8A is 8A involves the cleaning contract, and I know that the administration is very keen on achieving the real living wage. It was part of your pact agreement to manage that internally immediately, which you've successfully done, and then transition forwards as much as possible and look at how much that will cost you. This particular contract has 108 cleaning staff at the moment and is expected to run for the next 3 years with an extension for a potential extension for another 1 year, taking it to 4 years. And your term of office is 4 years, starting from May that has just gone. It may be that you get returned to office after the 4-year term. I don't know if your pact will survive or what will happen then, but I'm just talking about this particular contract. The number of cleaning staff at 108 is quite relevant to the job and the nature of the payments for that job. Historically, this is a sector that is not highly paid and is often on the national wage, not the real living wage. I feel that if you're serious about your commitment to real living wage in this example, and perhaps in other examples that you may wish to consider, is probably the most relevant one that you will come across for introducing the real living wage. In the actual officer commentary, I can't remember the point, that financial implications on the paper, it says that the real living wage will be included but not mandated. And I feel that you as the joint administration, it's not to do with me, it's not my wishes, it's your wishes, but I just thought that I'd highlight it to you that if that is your wishes to introduce it for probably the market that needs that help the most, then this is the time to do it, and not as you develop your plans for how to introduce it elsewhere, as this is probably the contract that will have the most impact, I would have thought. But the other one, the other one that would have a massive impact would be the social care home market. But of course, the implications of that would be you really do need to know your financial strategy is sound before you tackle one that large. But this one may be one that you can manage a bite-sized chunk for. Just bring it to your attention that you've promised a real living wage, but it's not in this one. It's only preferable, not mandated. And by the time it's finished, you may well be out of office. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. I think I'm just looking to Amanda on this one. The new procurement strategy and the work we're doing on procurement, I think, will be coming into place as we are looking at the tenders for this contract. That procurement strategy looks at a range of different elements. And as Councillor Bowden has asked, there will be work coming on that. I mean, there's been some internal work done so far, and I think it's going well. That will be coming back to members more widely, and I would imagine that this tender will go through that process, which doesn't just look at the real living wage. It looks at a range of different factors, which might determine which provider is likely to win a tender in the longer term. So I think that this will be part of our wider procurement strategy, which I'm actually quite excited about. I've got Richard next.
Again, I think it's a very fair question. I'm personally happy with the words consider at this stage because they're there, they're in black and white, and so it's going to be part of the tendering process and it will be considered. You know, as soon as, sorry, was it Councillor Count? I'm getting confused. It was. Thank you. Apologies. We can go through to mandation when we've got the finance and the policy sorted out. But I'm very happy that this is a step in the right direction, and I'm very happy to hear the opposition speaking in favour of the real living wage.
Excellent. Okay. I don't see any more hands, so I think at that point we will move to a vote on the recommendations for these ones. So the committee is asked to endorse the reprocurement of the following frameworks, which are due to expire in the next 12 months, and those are laid out in the papers. So if we could take those as a block, please. All those in favour, if you could raise your hands now. Thank you. I'm aware that we've been sitting here for 2 hours and 10 minutes and that we've got a number of other items on the agenda. I think we've got 2 more items that we need to take, well, maybe 3 that we need to take in public, and then we're going to move into private session. So what I'm hoping we can do is take those and then have a 5-minute break, or possibly a 10-minute break before we move into private session. So I hope that will be a manageable amount of time for everybody. But if we find that these next decisions are taking longer than I expected, we may have that break beforehand. So if we now move on to item 9, which is business planning, I'm guessing, yeah, Tom, this is over to you again.
Thank you, Chair. So we're now on to page 187 of the agenda pack. This is the first update this year for this committee looking in detail at business planning. Many members of the committee will have seen similar information go through each of the individual service committees during September. Taking committee to section 1.2, this will be the familiar 5-year budget gap position that was agreed at the February full council, so a balanced budget for the first year. And then the most significant gap in the first year of just over 22 million. There's been significant progress reported in this report, not so much in closing that gap, as we'll come on to in a second. It's actually increased slightly to 23.5 million, which is often the case during the summer. But in refreshing demand, inflation and in pressures estimates and making sure those are robust as much as possible at this stage. Of course, it's an iterative process where they'll continue to be revisited throughout the year. But the report also signals significant risk and uncertainty and connects much of that to the pandemic, and I would just draw the committee's attention to 3 effects of that have a financial impact going forward. So firstly, there's the impact on local taxation, and of course we're a step removed from the billing authorities and reliant on them really for the latest information, both as that affects business rates where there has already been an impact, and on council tax where the impact has been more muted so far, but the significant risk perhaps going forward, particularly as the furlough scheme draws to an end. There's the impact on the council's collection of sales fees and charges. Of course, there's been significant government support to 75% of those losses, which continued for the first 3 months of this year. But looking ahead, we don't have that support going forward. It hasn't been extended for the remainder of the current year. And how quickly those levels of income recover, and whether they ever recover to original levels, is an important consideration. And perhaps most significantly is the impact of the pandemic on demand and our local care markets, supply chains, and the services we rely on across a number of our frontline services, and the way that the pandemic has kind of changed the economy and led to different long-range impacts that will change both demand for services and how the supply chains we use to meet that demand. At section 2.1.2, you can see the reconciliation of the budget gap. So taking that position of a 22.2 million gap at the beginning, there were some updates made at the September committee, and then taking through demand, inflation and pressures, the updates made across the piece. I think all of the changes you see here are kind of the result of significant pressures, so there's not much choice in what we're seeing here. And just drawing attention to a number of those. So there's a significant pressure on waste disposal and the odour permit conditions. Continuing to look at what the exact figures will be there, but we know there will be a revenue pressure from complying with the Environment Agency's regulatory requirements on that one. We also know guided busway defects litigation is continuing, and that has an ongoing impact in the business plan. And there's additional pressures recognised given the capacity issues facing our special educational needs teams, and the council's contribution to occupational therapy for children's services. The committee will see as well an increase in the demand allocations, having recalculated based on activity levels and population projections. The largest numbers there are in adults social care, and indeed the committee gives the report gives further details about where they arise. I draw particular attention to the second main bullet point under 4.1.2, so particularly learning disabilities and the increasing pressure facing children transitioning into adulthood, and the growth of that cohort of the service, a significant area of pressure going forward. The report then signals, of course, this is a significant budget gap and a significant challenge that faces us both for next year and across the whole business planning period. And moving, of course, I think in recent times to a more tactical footing that's reflected the government's approach. We haven't had a multi-year spending settlement for some time, but hopeful that that multi-year settlement will come forward this year, and in turn we can reflect a greater multi-year approach to business planning through this report. So there's significant work underway, as I said earlier in the meeting, to address that budget gap, and we give further details of that in section 3. Broadly across the different headings, the way that shortfall will be addressed is through a combination of 4 factors. So firstly, government funding, and that is a major uncertainty at this stage. Will there be further support coming forward? I think the budget has now been set, the national budget date has been set for the end of October, and the local government finance settlement will come through as normal in late December. But clearly we've been cautioned through the peer review not to count on significant additional funding. There's the possibility of one-off reallocation of funds from reserves. We've touched a bit on the different reserves that the council has available to it across the general funds, the transformation fund, some service-specific reserves, and carry forward of grant related to the pandemic, and that will be an important consideration as part of the strategy. This report makes no assumptions or suggestions on that at this stage, but it will be something that will be advanced for later meetings as we go forward. There will be a local consideration about council tax. The assumption in the numbers you have before you is that there is a 1.99% increase in council tax, and we know that there is 2% of council tax through the adult social care precept that wasn't utilised last year, that can be carried forward to the first year of this business plan. But what this year's referendum limit will be, we're not yet clear, so that is a further piece of information that we await from central government. And then the balance, and this will clearly be the most significant element, I would say, will be across initiatives to identify savings, efficiency, funding, new income, and where investments can generate those improved returns. We set out in the report the different high-level approaches that we are considering as part of that, and it touches on some of the factors we've already spoken about in this meeting, whether that be social value, prevention and early intervention, economic recovery, decentralisation of budget, or the environment and climate emergency. And then the only other thing I'd say then is to just draw attention to the next steps. As I say, this is an iterative process. This committee will consider progress again in November and then receive full business cases at its December meeting. Yeah, I think that's probably all I need to say in introduction.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. On this occasion, I'm going to also add a couple of words of my own at the end of that, just to say that this paper does outline just what an incredibly difficult situation we've inherited as an administration at this council, and that the peer review made it very clear that the previous decisions made by previous administrations have left us in a much less good position than would have been the case, and that that's going to make our future planning much more constrained than we would like it to be. We're not in an easy position in terms of the decisions we've got to make. The other points I want to make is that while the peer review also made clear that we should not place any reliance on increases in government funding, that doesn't mean we have in any way stopped fighting for that. It's still really clear that Cambridgeshire as a public sector overall is significantly underfunded and does need more government money, and we will be continuing to fight for that nationally, and continuing to demand that government recognise new burdens that they're placing on councils, and provide the additional funding that should go with those new burdens, because there are several of those that we are facing and that should be coming from government funding, and we wait to see in the spending review and the local government settlement what will come out of those. But we have not given up the fight for better funding from national government for Cambridgeshire, because it's still very much needed. On which note, I will go to Josh.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't want to interrupt you with a point of order, but I just wanted to be very clear. The peer review did not say that previous decisions have left this council in a less good position, your exact words there. It doesn't mention that at all. It actually reads that historic decisions to not increase council tax by the maximum possible level has resulted in significant ongoing lost income, recognising that lost income is by not taxing our residents. It doesn't mention anything about good or bad. It just recognises that we haven't generated a maximum amount of income from taxing our residents by the maximum possible amount. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that clarity. Any further comments on this paper? Steve?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I want to take us to 3.4, which is about the Chief Finance Officer's professional view that general fund balance should not be reduced from its current level in view of the risks the Council is currently facing, which I totally endorse and support. It's been said about 3% for as long as I can remember, and the peer review found that to be adequate as opposed to what other people have said about it being inadequate. I'd like to point out the Transformation Fund, which we've already heard about earlier on today, has been dipped into already, although a minor amount of £175,000, not for the purpose that was originally intended, but is going to be used, potentially could be used as a kind of secondary general reserve, and there is a pandemic-related carried forward currently of 21 million. So those general reserves add up somewhere in the region of 45, 55, 64 million, something like that, of usable reserves, although I agree with Tom, don't start using the general reserve no matter what, and try and avoid using the other ones, because one-off use of reserves means you have no plan for future funding, and you just move, in most cases, the requirement for funding in further years. I'd like to also highlight the actual gap, which I think I'm trying to reach the page, can't find it at the moment, but 23 million and then falling off to 15 million and figures like that. And we keep getting this mantra, the significant challenges left by the previous administration. So I'd like an action, please, Tom. I would like to know, over the last 4 years of the Conservative administration, the total budget gap we faced in each one of our 5-year terms compared to this one, because I know, without looking up the figures, how much greater they were. There were numbers hitting £60 million in a year. And yet we balanced the budget every year. And not only did we balance the budget every year, but it appears, according to the peer review, that we saved the public of Cambridgeshire £63 million whilst balancing the budget every single year. On one occasion only, we sought to tax the Cambridgeshire public ahead of spending. We said, actually, we can't manage next year without taxing you a bit more because we don't know how to get there. And we created what was called a smoothing reserve. We said we won't use that this year. We will use that next year because we'll have to. And by golly, we were right. We did have to. But we got there. And you know who castigated us for that? For actually taxing more and creating a smoothing reserve? The entire opposition, who wanted to tax and spend. In fact, the vast majority of that £63 million was put forward at every single occasion as an administration changed the budget to tax for the full amount, but actually spend it on new spending commitments at the same time. So if they had been in charge, you would not actually have any extra money to spend, but you'd actually have extra spending commitments at the same time. So I'm very proud of my record, our record as Conservative administration, and I'm actually going to dare Tom to put it to the test. Could we have, as an action, circulated to the committee the 4 years we were the administration, the budget gap we faced over the MTFS, and the amount of reserves, which was General Reserve and Transformation Fund for all those years, whereas it's General Reserve, Transformation Fund and Pandemic Reserve this year, and I will put that to the test. One of the other things that happened when we were the administration, we were told mid-term that we were foolish not to tax to the maximum amount. Well, actually, not to tax the maximum at all. And at that point in time, the papers were 15.6% needed to present the budget. But Councillor Netzinger did a marvellous job of rescuing the councillor who got that one wrong and saying no, maximum possible. But we've got the papers in front of us today, and we've got no recommendation to actually change the MTFS at this stage. Why are you sticking to the old Conservative administration of trying to limit council tax rises, which is the MTFS based on 2%, when you could automatically go to 4% for this year, which you've already stated is your desire to Now, we know that there might be flexibility and it might go even up to 5%, who knows? But at this point in time, you're allowed to tax more than that. So why are you not changing your figures at the earliest possible opportunity to what you've already committed to, announced, and said it would be foolish not to do? I, of course, won't support it at this stage, and I'd be surprised if any of my colleagues do. But why hide that from the public at this stage? They're going to be budgeting for next year, and I think it's only fair for you to reveal your plans as early as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Richard.
I think it's only fair for you to reveal your plans as early as possible from an administration that wouldn't publish its plans even a few days before it set the council tax last time. Now, I actually think the opposition today has been asking some very good questions, and good luck to you. But I think you do need to have a degree of humility about what happened in the past. I'm not sure how much the Cambridgeshire public want to sit here when we're all waiting for our comfort break, debating the last 4 years of the administration and its record. But you did leave us as the second most indebted of all county councils in the country. You did leave us with reserves that the audit showed were below the minimum needed necessary. The peer review does say that you left us.
Sorry,
I'm actually talking, and the rules of procedure of this council are really
Councillor Count,
clear.
if you could let him finish, then I will let you come back.
I'm amazed also that the opposition, having been told that their conduct is under scrutiny, can't listen to alternative points of view without seeking to interrupt, and they should reflect on that. This is an administration that, in the past, that the peer review shows us left income unraised. Now, yes, there could be a political debate about that, but your own Conservative colleague who signed off the LGA peer review was very, very happy with recording to that working. And so I simply say this. We have been left in a difficult position. You're never going to agree to that. The public will, in their own terms, make the political choices about that. But let's put on record what we did inherit, and also let's not ask our officer, Tom Kelly, to reply to essentially political requests. If you want private information, you can write to him, he'll write back, you put it in the public domain, and so will we. But let's not draw our officers into party political debates either.
Councillor Count.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry whether I should have waited to the end or not. I didn't know how deeply you was going to bury yourself, but you said that the auditor said our reserves were insufficient. I've not seen that anywhere, and we've just heard from Tom in the paperwork that these are the normal reserves. And I just trying to protect people from digging themselves too deep a hole. If you can find an auditor's report that told us we have insufficient reserves, I'd like to read that. I've never seen it.
Thank you for that clarification. Just to pick up on some of the other points that were made in your comments, Councillor Count, in particular in relation to the work of the previous administration in enforcing on Cambridgeshire cuts of a level that were beyond what was absolutely necessary. I think when we're having this political debate about what could have been done over the last 4 years and what was done, we also need to look at not only the financial position that's left the council and the people of Cambridgeshire, but also the position of their services. We have, during those 4 years, our children's centres were decimated. The condition of our roads has deteriorated. The current highways, the current situation in the Highways Department in terms of simply understanding what's going on is extraordinary. So I think when we're looking at what the council has delivered for the people of Cambridgeshire over the last 4 years, it's not just about looking at the savings that were made, it's also at what cost. And that is a cost to the level of service and the provisions for everyone in Cambridgeshire. And that's why when I say we're facing a difficult situation, it's not just a difficult financial situation, it's a difficult situation in terms of the services that people in Cambridgeshire expect and what is being provided. I would quite like to move on now. Are there any other comments on this paper? Okay, on that, in that case,
Chair, could you ask the point about whether you're going to actually amend the to the 4% straight away, as that's possible, so that you're working with real figures? Could you answer that, please?
I think, as was pointed out by Councillor Howard, the previous administration was not quick to be saying what its council tax strategy was going to be. I am expecting that the current administration will be a little bit faster than you were in terms of letting the public know what its council strategy is going to be, but we will not be doing that today. Thank you. Councillor Schumann.
Sorry, Chair, I just wanted to clarify your point you just made there. So a new administration will be a little bit faster. Is that openness and transparency? Is that how you interpret it?
It'll do for now. I think I'd like to move to the recommendations. So the committee is recommended to note the overview and context provided for the 2022 to 27 business plan, and it notes the initial estimates made for demand, inflation and other pressures. So all those in favour of noting the report, if you could raise your hands now, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Any against? Lovely. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 10, the Treasury Management Report. And Tom, you can introduce this.
So, Chair, I'll just briefly draw attention to two issues in this report. Firstly, in section 5, there's an update on the Council's Treasury investments and the security of those, the kind of underlying capital value looks pleasing and in several cases yielding an income return in line with expectations. And then in section 6, we pick out where there's been opportunities during Q1 to refinance short-term loans that are maturing onto a longer-term footing where rates at BWLB have been advantageous. That's all I'll say. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Lucy. This report, by its very nature, is backward-looking, but it nonetheless refers to things which move forwards into the future. And it's the very last point that Tom just raised, which gives me some degree of concern, because there seemed to be very little challenge placed in here about the consensus from government and from the Bank of England concerning the prospects of future rates of inflation. I, for one, and I'm not, I have to say there are professional economists who actually say this, so it's not just an amateur like myself, but I, for one, am sceptical about the validity of the assumptions which are being made by the Bank of England and by central government about how quickly inflation will be coming back down again. I've got very severe concerns about that. And my concern is that we as a council aren't necessarily taking into account the fact that government and the Bank of England may be being substantially over-optimistic in the assumptions that they're making. And I think we as a council need to have a worst-case scenario of what will our position be if we do find ourselves with a higher rate of inflation than is currently being forecast. Now, inflation and interest rates do have a fair degree of correlation between them, although they're not directly correlated. And that's where the point that Tom's just made is interesting, because we do have a significant amount, 800 million we had at the quarter end, 800 million of net borrowing, and a good amount of short-term borrowing where refinancing was available, and much of that refinancing was able to be done beneficially compared with what was being refinanced. Fully accept all of that. My concern is, are we making the right decisions in terms of being cautious about the maturity periods of what we are refinancing, given that we may find ourselves in a situation which is substantially worse in terms of inflation than the government's current projections. And I just wonder whether we've done any analysis on that to try and protect ourselves in the position that we may find ourselves in when some of the refinancing, which comes up for further refinancing in a year or 2 years or 3 years' time, depending on what period you chose, are we potentially landing ourselves in difficulties? Because I can only see a downside risk as far as refinancing in 2 and 3 years' time are concerned.
I'll come to Tom, but then I'll also make a comment on that.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Bowden. So, in terms of the PWLB borrowing, we're quite led by our Treasury advisors, and they do have a view both in the short term that interest rates are going to persist at a low level, although I know that doesn't necessarily address your concern, and also help us to look at where the best value is in that PWLB borrowing curve. So the borrowing we've done with PWLB is very long term, so taking us up towards 50 years, because that's where the best value is at the moment. And as you say, we're able to borrow beneficially compared to the amounts that are maturing. In terms of borrowing from other local authorities, I suppose there is both the impact of where interest rates and the extent to which they rely on inflation are moving, and also the point in the cycle and where other local authorities are in terms of their financing, both in terms of the time of year and the kind of progress of government grants. So we're very conscious in terms of when we take loans, ensuring they don't mature in points of the year where it is difficult to get further local authority financing. And it is a balance, and that's what we've tried to show across the piece, that where there are opportunities to refinance at beneficial rates, we'll do that and fix for the long term. But there is also tremendous value in very short-term borrowing, and not using any of that would also have a cost and impact on services as well. So it's a balance of all of those things, taking advice from the Treasury advisor, and we will we will just really push and relay that point on inflation risk looking ahead, because the estimates do update quite regularly, and we've seen that with their bank rate estimate kind of increasing for next year, which wasn't in the projections before. So I give Councillor Bowden the assurance it's an issue we're very alive to.
Thank you. I had been going to make some comments about the need for worst case scenario planning, and that I rather wished that Her Majesty's government had done some worst case scenario planning in relation to Brexit, but perhaps I'll leave that. But I do, however, think that actually listening to the projections of the Bank of England does seem an extremely legitimate position for the council to be taking. They are the experts, and I think probably a good place for us to be basing our assumptions. But as Tom says, it is something we're extremely aware of. Councillor Cant.
Yes, it's on the same point, and it's probably more useful and pertinent to the business planning paper than it is to this one, but hopefully I'll explain it. Worst case scenario planning. The Bank of England tends to publish a lot of figures and National Office of Statistics. I'm not sure who does what and where they are, but on the subject of inflation, you can often get a fan graph, and what is revealed to us all is the central position on that fan graph, and that is what they announce as their projection. But that is what they predict to be their most likely scenario, and the outliers become less likely as they go out. I would not think it's unreasonable to do some work on perhaps an 80% scenario worst case rather than the 100%. It wouldn't be unreasonable. And I'm not as concerned, and this is where I diverge from the Treasury management to the business planning, I'm not as concerned about our investments and our borrowing, because the borrowing can be over the 50 years and the investments are a very small part of our day-to-day business. What I'm concerned about, and you may recall, I brought this up at it was either the last SNR or the full council, either way, I said I'm extremely worried about these inflation predictions, because they're expecting the higher inflation to kick in and shake out quite quickly. But whether it's Brexit, COVID, whatever the reason is, my personal expectation would lie higher on that fan graph than what we're getting as the central position. Now, when you look at the impact on that, on perhaps social care and the NHS and the things we buy in the hundreds of millions of pounds, then it becomes very scary. All right? And I do think that the administration should ask some work to be done on perhaps like the 80% scenario, and then do some what-if scenario planning in that context. If it gets that bad, you know that there'll be an element of government involvement, etc. But if you're prepared and pre-planned, then you can try and deal with it. And I honestly don't believe that the central prediction will hold fast where it is. So thank you.
Thank you. Those are helpful and constructive comments, and we will take them on board. Are there any other comments on this paper? Okay, so on this one, the committee is recommended to note the Treasury report. All those in favour of noting it, please raise your hands. Thank you. And then the final, that was unanimous, Michelle. The final item on today's agenda is the committee agenda plan and training plan. This is the final item before we move into private session. So it's the final item for the public session. Michelle, if we could move to that one, please.
Yes, the main thing to note is that your November meeting, which is down as a reserve date, will actually be used. As you can see, some items on there. And just to correct that the Integrated Finance Monitoring Report will be the August report, not the September one. That's incorrect. And the training side is for Amanda to update.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, happy to do that. So I sent round an email to all members of this committee with the training things the topics that we gathered up so far. That's come from various people, and just asking if there's any additions to that. Additional to that list that we had at that time, we'll have the COVID impact assessment work as well. But if there's no other comments on that, I'll start planning those in.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, I don't see any comments on this. So at that point, we will close the public meeting. I will just go back to find the exclusion of the press and public. So I would like to propose that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that appendices 6 and 7 of agenda item 6 are likely to involve the disclosure of exempt information under paragraphs 3 and 5 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, as it refers to information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information, and information in respect of which a claim to legal professional privilege could be maintained in legal proceedings. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you. Are there any objections to us moving to private session? I don't see any objections. So if I could ask all members of the public and press to leave the meeting room, and that the live stream is now closed. The decision from this item will be recorded on the decision summary and published in the usual way. And thank you for joining us today. So while they shut that down, if we could take a 5-minute comfort break, is that going to be long enough for everybody? If not, if you're not back, I'll be generous, but if we can try and make it 10 minutes. Okay, we'll take 10 minutes. Back at 5 to 1, please, everybody.